Have you ever wondered why some places refuse to give up their secrets, even when we dig, measure, and study them for centuries? What if the ground beneath your feet held a truth that was never meant to be found? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the place where history whispers and the world's strangest mysteries wait in the dark. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. The skeletons chained in a desert of silence. The desert has always been a place where sound disappears. The endless dunes swallow voices, footsteps, even the faint sigh of the wind. Travelers across Arabia have long said that the sands can hear everything, yet they answer nothing. You might shout into the empty expanse, and your own words will come back to you, muffled, distorted, as if the desert itself had chewed them and left them broken. Silence. In these lands is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of something else, something patient, something watching. It was here, in a stretch of desert so barren that even the Bedouin avoided it, that skeletons were found. Not lying scattered by raiders, not buried in the shifting dunes, not resting in proper graves. No, these were skeletons chained together, rows of them, locked by iron that had survived the centuries while their flesh and stories had long since faded. No inscription marked their resting place. No shrine or stone cairn remembered them. Only the chains and the bones within them remained. Archaeologists came with their brushes and their notebooks, with cameras and measuring tapes, but the desert gave them nothing. No pottery, no coins, no clothing that could be dated. Only the skeletons, some curled as if they had fallen to their knees, some sprawled as if in flight, some heads bent in a gesture that could almost be mistaken for prayer, but all bound, all silent, and no one could say how long they had been there. The desert preserves, bodies can lie beneath sand for thousands of years, untouched by rain or rot. Tools remain sharp. Footprints last until the wind takes them, and so when the skeletons were uncovered, they looked as though they had lain down only yesterday. The bones were bleached, but unbroken. The chains were rusted, but whole. The sun glared above them, indifferent, and the sands whispered around them, as if the earth was relieved that their secret had finally been disturbed. Who were they? Were they criminals punished by some forgotten ruler, left to die beneath the burning sky? Were they prisoners of war, dragged from distant lands and abandoned in the dunes when their captors perished? Or were they something else? Something older, something stranger, something bound not for punishment, but for containment. Legends ripple through the Bedouin like heat mirages. They speak of places in the desert where no bird flies, where no camel will tread, where even the stars above seem to flicker and dim. The chains, some say, were not placed by men at all, but by those who came before, in an age when the desert was young. These skeletons, so the stories go, are not prisoners but wardens, or prisoners of a kind that must never be released. The desert does not give answers easily, but it gives signs. The skeletons were found facing west, toward the direction of the Red Sea. Some had their hands bound behind their backs, others in front, as though ritual had dictated their arrangement. A few still bore shackles that locked their ankles together, and strangest of all, one skeleton was different, larger, its bones thicker, its skull elongated, as though it did not quite belong to the same species as the others. Its chains were heavier too, forged of a metal that shimmered differently in the sun. Not the dull red of rust, but something more like black glass. The archaeologists took their notes, catalogued their findings, and carried samples away, but the locals refused to approach after that. For them the site was cursed. They said that the night after the skeletons were uncovered, the wind carried whispers across the desert. Chains rattling, faint voices, a sound like weeping. The camp dogs whined and circled, refusing to lie down. The camels spat and pulled at their tethers. And in the morning, one of the workers was gone. No footprints led away from the tents. His bed was simply empty, the chains near the skeletons faintly disturbed. You may think this is only folklore, the embroidery of frightened men upon an unusual find. But consider this, bones alone do not frighten those who have lived beside graves for centuries. The Bedouin bury their dead with simplicity, without stone markers, letting the desert take them back. Death is not terrifying to them. But chains, that is different. To die in chains in the desert is to die forgotten, and to be found still bound is to be remembered not as a man, but as a warning. The mystery deepens when you recall how Arabia has always been a crossroads. Empires rose and fell here, the Nabateans carving cities into stone, the kingdoms of Sheba and Himyar trading in incense and gold, the Romans and Persians stretching their borders into the sands. Armies marched across these deserts, caravans passed in endless file. Could these skeletons have been prisoners from those wars? Or were they something older, from a time before history was written in this land? The silence around them is the loudest part. No artifacts, no tools, no clothing scraps, nothing but bones and chains. Even the sand seemed to press itself close as though trying to hide them once more. Some scientists argued that shifting dunes might have carried away any other traces. Others suggested the skeletons had been moved there deliberately, stripped of belongings, meant to lie nameless. Yet the pattern of their arrangement was too deliberate, too careful, to be an accident of wind and time. And what of the strange skull, the one unlike the rest? It raises questions that scholars hesitate to put into print. Was it a deformity, the relic of some disease? Was it an outsider, captured from a distant tribe whose features differed? Or is it evidence of something else? Something that does not fit neatly into our catalogs of human ancestry. Night falls quickly in the desert. The heat vanishes. The stars blaze sharp and cold. Around the skeletons, the silence becomes absolute. No insects hum, no owl calls, no jackal dares to cry. Those who camp near the site claim the quiet presses on the ears like weight. Some swear that if you listen long enough, you can hear the sound of chains being dragged across the sand, though nothing moves. Others tell of shapes glimpsed at the edge of vision, tall, gaunt, shrouded in heat, haze even when the night is cool. Why were they bound? Why here of all places? The desert itself might hold the answer. Arabia's sands are littered with ruins of cities swallowed long ago. Once fertile valleys are now barren, rivers dried into empty gullies. Some say entire peoples were cursed, their names erased, their bones left to bleach so that no one would remember their sins. Perhaps these chained ones belonged to such a people. Perhaps their silence is the silence of erasure. There is another theory, whispered among scholars who study not just history, but myth. They point to the stories of the jinn, spirits said to dwell in lonely places, bound sometimes by chains of iron, or by words of power. Could the skeletons be linked to such tales? Were they men who consorted with powers they should not, chained to hold back what they had summoned? Or more unsettling still, were the skeletons themselves once vessels for such beings, and the chains were placed not to bind their bodies, but to bind what lingered within them? The larger skeleton, with its strange skull and heavier bonds, fits uncomfortably well into this theory. In the old texts, certain jinn were said to be titanic, stronger than any man, bound in iron until the end of days. Could this be a remnant of such a binding? If so, what does it mean that the sands revealed it now, that the silence has been broken? The archaeologists eventually left. Reports were written, theories debated, but the site was left unguarded. The desert swallowed it once more. Dunes shifted. Wind covered the bones again. Perhaps they still lie there, waiting, or perhaps the desert has moved them further, carrying them into a deeper silence where no eye will find them again. And yet the memory remains. Travelers still whisper of the skeletons chained in the desert. Some claim to have seen them in dreams, their empty sockets glowing faintly with starlight. Others believe the desert is restless now, that old bonds have been disturbed, and in the distance, when the night is very still, they say you can hear the faintest sound, a clink of iron, a rattle of chains carried on the wind that does not blow. The desert keeps its secrets, but sometimes it allows them to surface, like bones rising through sand. The skeletons are one such secret. They remind us that silence is not emptiness. Silence can be a voice, a warning, a memory chained in place until we are ready, or not ready, to hear it. So if you ever find yourself in Arabia, far from the cities where the stars burn fiercely and the dunes roll like a frozen sea, listen closely. Listen to the silence. If you hear nothing, you are safe. But if you hear chains, turn back. For some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some silences are not meant to be broken, and some skeletons should never be freed. The obsidian mask that reflected no face. One rape marichit a story older than memory. One that begins in shadow, in a land where stone and silence once spoke more loudly than kings or priests. A story about an object shaped by human hands, but never fully explained, that has survived the centuries like a mirror that refuses to answer. The obsidian mask. It is called that, though it is not like other masks, not one that smiles, or frowns, or even looks back at you. This one shows no face at all. And so we begin. Long before Mexico bore that name, before the rise of the Aztecs, before the cities of pyramids and broad stone plazas echoed with chants and drumbeats, there were smaller settlements of stone and clay, villages that were not yet empires, where the land itself was the true ruler. The mountains that curved like the backs of ancient beasts, the rivers that carved their own unyielding paths, the volcanoes, still restless, still remembered in myth as gods sleeping lightly beneath the crust. It was from these mountains that obsidian came, black glass, born of fire, a stone sharper than steel, but fragile as thought, a material that could wound but also reflect. No metal gleamed like it, no other stone seemed so alive in the light. Obsidian was already sacred long before any mask was carved. Hunters had shaped arrowheads and knives from it for thousands of years, but as societies grew more complex, so too did their use of it. In temples, obsidian blades were offered in sacrifice. In burials, it was placed beside the dead, sharp enough to cut a path to the other world. But among the countless obsidian artifacts uncovered in Mexico, daggers, jewelry, figurines, there is one that still resists explanation. A mask, carved with precision, polished to a gleam. And yet, where its eyes should hold vision, where its features should give it life, there is only blankness. Smooth surfaces that catch light, but return nothing. Imagine being the archaeologist who first lifted it from the soil. The desert air still, the grit of sand whispering across stone. At first glance, you might think it broken, eroded by centuries, but no, its facelessness was intentional. Whoever carved it wanted it that way. The mask was found not far from Teotihuacan, the great city whose name means the place where gods were made. Even in ruins, Teotihuacan astonishes. Avenue after avenue aligned with celestial precision, pyramids rising as if to touch the sky, walls painted with bright murals long since dulled by time. And somewhere in that wide city, the obsidian mask was buried, not on a throne, not in a temple, not displayed where thousands might see it. No, it was hidden, as though its power was too concentrated, too intimate, to be left in the open. Archaeologists discovered it near an ancient cache, alongside offerings of shells, jade, and tiny sculptures, each item carefully arranged, each one with meaning. But the mask, unlike the others, seemed to deny meaning. Its face refused to speak. Hold it in your mind now. Black, gleaming, a human shape but without expression, neither smiling nor grimacing, neither male nor female, neither alive nor entirely dead, just a void shaped like a person. A suggestion of humanity, with all humanity removed. Some say it was never meant to be worn. Indeed, the obsidian would have been heavy, brittle, and cutting against skin. The mask is too perfect, too deliberate, to be a costume. Instead, perhaps, it was meant to sit before someone, to absorb, to reflect. In ancient Mesoamerica, mirrors were more than tools for vanity. They were portals. Priests gazed into obsidian mirrors to glimpse visions, to read omens, to converse with what was hidden. To them, the polished blackness was not emptiness, but depth, an entryway to something beyond. Could the mask have been another kind of mirror? Not one that showed your reflection, but one that erased it. A mask that insisted, here is not you, but no one at all. We can imagine the ceremonies. A chamber lit by torches, flames trembling, the mask placed upon an altar, its surface swallowing the light. Priests kneeling, chanting low, the words reverberating against stone walls. The smell of incense thick in the air, a smoke that curled and clung. Those gathered would have stared into the mask and seen nothing. Not their own face, not the face of their neighbor. Just the void, a void that might whisper back if you stared long enough. What would it mean to place before yourself a face that has no face, to erase your reflection, to strip away your identity? Perhaps the mask was not an object at all, but an experience. A ritual that confronted the participant with silence, with absence. A reminder that beneath all masks, the painted ones, the feathered ones, even the flesh itself, there may be only this, blankness. And yet, in that blankness, there is power. We should remember that in Mesoamerican cosmology, death was not an ending, but a passage. The underworld was not a place of punishment, but of journey. Souls traveled through layers, guided by animals, challenged by rivers, tested by winds. To enter it, you had to leave behind the world of the living. You had to let go of your name, your possessions, your very face. Could the obsidian mask have been a key to this passage? An object meant to strip away what tied you to this side, so you could continue to the next. The archaeologist cataloged the mask, photographed it, placed it in storage, later in museums. Visitors today can see it displayed under glass. They can lean close, their own faces hovering above the surface, and what they see is unsettling. The mask does not return your gaze. It does not acknowledge you. It swallows your reflection. You are there, and yet you are gone. For some, this might be unnerving. For others, strangely calming. A reminder that identity is not fixed, but fragile. That who we think we are may dissolve in an instant, leaving behind only the echo of a shape. Consider how obsidian itself is formed. Lava bursts from the earth, molten, wild. It cools so quickly that crystals cannot form. The result is volcanic glass, brittle, sharp, and shining. The mask, then, is a product of fire and silence. It carries within it the memory of eruption, but presents itself as stillness. Some whisper that the mask was cursed, that those who gazed too long into it lost something of themselves. Not their soul exactly, but their anchor to the world, their voice, their certainty, that in staring into the absence stared back and claimed a piece of them. But archaeology prefers other explanations. It cannot afford curses. Scholars suggest the mask may have represented a god, perhaps Tezcatlipoca, whose very name means smoking mirror. He was a deity associated with obsidian, with night, with the invisible and the unknowable. In some myths, he was trickster, warrior, and judge all at once. He watched humans through reflective surfaces. He was there, and not there. If the mask was his image, then its lack of a face was deliberate. To show his presence was to show nothing, because he could be anywhere, in any shadow. Tezcatlapac's rituals were not gentle. Human sacrifices were performed in his honor. Victims chosen and dressed as his living image, paraded, and then offered at the end. When their lives ended, their faces too ended. And perhaps, at some point in that ceremony, the obsidian mask was present, witnessing, absorbing. But what strikes us today, as modern eyes peer into its sheen, is how contemporary it feels. Stripped of context, it could be a sculpture by a modern minimalist artist. Smooth planes, absence of detail, a rejection of likeness, as though it belongs to no single time, which is perhaps fitting, because masks are not about who we are, they are about who we are not. Imagine, if you will, walking through a museum late at night. The halls empty, the air hushed. The obsidian mask sits in its case, a single light above it. You approach, and as you do, your footsteps fade, as though the air itself thickens. You lean closer, your face hovers above its surface, and for a moment, you see yourself, the outline of your features. But then as you keep looking, your reflection slips, the blackness deepens, your nose, your mouth, your eyes vanish. You are erased. Only the mask remains, holding your shape but not your identity, and in that instant you wonder, not what you are looking at, but what is looking back. Some say objects carry memory, that the stone remembers the hands that touched it, the ceremonies it witnessed. The obsidian mask has been handled by priests, by rulers, by the dead, by the archaeologists who uncovered it, by the gloved curators who moved it from one museum to another. It has traveled centuries, silent, unchanged, as empires rose and fell, as languages shifted, as new gods replaced the old. Through it all, the mask has remained, still blank, still faceless, still waiting. Perhaps that is its lesson, that faces change, but the void beneath them does not. That identity is a mask we put on, one after another, but none of them last. The obsidian mask reflects no face, because it reflects all faces. It reminds us that we are temporary, while silence endures, and so it rests, behind glass, under lights, while visitors pass. Some stop and stare, others glance and move on. A few linger longer than they mean to, caught by something they cannot quite name. Perhaps they feel it too, the whisper of the void, the erasure of the self. And perhaps late at night, when the museum is empty, when the lights are dimmed and only shadows walk the halls, the mask gleams faintly in the dark, not reflecting, but watching, not seeing, but remembering. The obsidian mask that reflected no face. It has not spoken for 1,000 years, but in its silence, it tells us more than words ever could. The tomb of the dancers frozen in stone, beneath the soft sun of the Aegean world, where whitewashed walls tumble down to seas of unbroken blue. There are places that keep secrets no ocean tide can wash away. Greece is remembered for its marble temples, its philosophers and myths, its warriors and kings. But every so often, the earth itself opens to reveal stories too fragile for history, too strange for legend, stories that drift quietly between both. One such story lies in the soil, where dancers who should have been fleeting motion are instead locked in stone, their steps stilled, their rhythm caught forever within a tomb. It was in a quiet valley not far from ruins, once belonging to an ancient polis, that the discovery was made. Farmers had long spoken of odd protrusions of stone in their fields, fragments that looked too finely shaped to belong to mere rock. One spring, when the rains softened the ground and the plows turned deeper than before, a strange shape emerged, not broken rubble, but what appeared to be the carved folds of drapery. The lines were smooth, almost delicate, the way only the hand of an artisan could coax from marble, and from that moment, whispers began to spread. The archaeologists came slowly, as they always do, with tents and notebooks, brushes and patient hands. They had expected another small shrine, perhaps another grave of a forgotten soldier. But the further they dug, the more the ground resisted giving up its story in fragments. Instead, a chamber appeared, carefully laid with slabs of stone, untouched for centuries. When the first torchlight slipped inside, the air it illuminated was heavy, dry, as if sealed away from the world outside for longer than memory. And then, there they were. Figures, carved in stone, standing in a circle, not statues erected in a temple, nor guardians flanking the walls, but dancers, men and women both, leaning, lifting, caught in poses that once must have been alive with music. Their faces bore the faintest traces of smiles, but their eyes were blank, limbs bent in gestures of celebration, robes swirling as though lifted by a wind that no longer moved. It was as if a single moment of revelry had been frozen, their bodies turned to stone mid-step, And at the heart of them all, raised upon a small pedestal, lay what seemed to be an altar, its surface darkened with age. The scholars could not agree. Were these statues placed there deliberately, offerings to some forgotten god of dance or ritual, or were they victims of an older myth, petrified in truth by the wrath of something beyond understanding? The villagers preferred the latter explanation, murmuring tales of Dionysus, the god who blurred the line between ecstasy and madness. To dance too long in his honor, they said, was to risk being carried away by his power. And yet here, instead of vanishing into story, the dancers remained. What puzzled researchers most was the realism of their features. These were not the idealized forms of Olympian gods, nor the stiff figures of archaic art. Their bodies bore imperfections, wrinkles at the corners of mouths, the slight unevenness of a shoulder, the wear of mortal life. They seemed like portraits carved from living models, each dancer a true person. But why would such ordinary people be immortalized in so strange a tomb? The chamber itself gave few answers. The floor was covered in a mosaic of broken tiles, its patterns difficult to discern, though faint curves suggested spirals, perhaps a labyrinth. The walls carried faint etchings, but the centuries had worn them smooth. Only by tracing with fingertips in the flickering torchlight could shapes be guessed. A lyre here, a mask there, the outlines of vines that once must have wound in endless repetition. And then there was the silence. Within the tomb, sound seemed to die. Whispers dulled, footsteps lost their echo. To stand among the stone dancers was to feel as though one had stepped into a world removed from time, a world where the air itself was held in suspension. Excavation revealed more. At the base of the altar lay small offerings, shards of clay cups, fragments of jewelry, a bronze pin still faintly green from age. These were not grave goods of wealth, nor treasures stolen to honor a king. They were tokens, personal, ordinary. It was as though friends had left behind keepsakes for those who danced their last dance here. And so the question deepened. Was this tomb a burial, or a theater, a crypt, or a stage? Scholars argued late into the night, poring over what they had uncovered. Some saw it as a mystery cult, a secret group devoted to rites lost to history, where dance was more than performance, it was prayer, it was transcendence. Others whispered of punishments, of maidens who mocked the gods, of celebrants who refused to stop their revelry when silence was demanded. In Greek myth, the line between joy and hubris was perilously thin. Yet there is another possibility, softer, sadder, that these were not statues at all, but people once real, whose memories had been preserved by the stone in the only way their community could manage. Imagine a festival interrupted by tragedy, a collapse, a fire, or some sudden silence that stole the dancers' lives. Grief-stricken, the survivors might have carved them into permanence, so that their dance would never be forgotten. The tomb then becomes a monument not to gods, but to memory, to the fragile insistence that joy once lived should endure beyond death. Centuries passed over the valley, kingdoms rose and fell, and the dancers waited in the dark. Their tomb remained sealed, untouched, while storms swept the hills above, and armies trampled roads nearby. All the while their steps lingered, forever half-finished, caught between one note of music and the next. Even now, when visitors are permitted to step softly into the chamber, there is a stillness that clings to the air. The light of the electric lamps is pale compared to the torchlight that first revealed them. But it does not matter. Their circle remains unbroken, their gestures eternal. To walk among them is to feel as though the rhythm of their dance stirs faintly beneath the silence, waiting for a song that will never again be played. And so the tomb of the dancers has become a riddle. It is not as famous as temples or citadels, not as grand as palaces or theaters. But in its quiet way, it unsettles more deeply. For it asks not how people lived or ruled, but how they remembered joy, how they held on to it when time sought to erase it. Were the dancers worshippers, punished or praised? Were they beloved, immortalized by grief? Or were they only ever meant as art, their mystery unintended, their meaning lost? In the end, the truth may never be known. The stone is silent, the dancers do not move, and yet in their silence, they whisper still, of festivals long faded, of laughter that once rang in the night air, of steps taken on soft earth that are now taken in eternity. The tomb is their theater now, the stone their audience, the centuries their endless stage. And so, in a hidden valley of Greece, the dancers remain, frozen not in death, but in the fragile eternity of memory. And as long as someone steps inside and wonders at them, their dance is not finished. The golden horn that sang without breath, beneath the soft gray skies of Denmark, where the land seems to breathe with the rhythm of the sea and the whisper of the wind, a secret lay hidden for centuries. It was a treasure both delicate and immense. Strange yet deeply human, two golden horns unlike anything else in the ancient world. They were long, curved, gleaming objects, their surfaces alive with figures and scenes hammered in gold. But what made them unforgettable was not just their craftsmanship. They were horns that could sing, horns meant to be raised to the lips, yet they sang without breath. To begin the story of the golden horns, we must step back into the soil of Jutland, into the damp earth of southern Denmark where they were unearthed. It was in the 17th century when the first discovery was made, in the small town of Galahus, near the German border. A farmer's daughter, walking through the fields, stumbled across something buried just beneath the plow line. At first it seemed a lump of twisted metal, its surface darkened by time and mud. But as it was pulled from the ground and brushed clean, the dull soil gave way to a glow of deep yellow, a gleam that caught the morning light with a brilliance too rich to be mistaken for anything ordinary. She had found a horn of gold. This first horn, nearly 3 feet in length, curved elegantly, its mouth flaring outward and its long body tapering into a delicate point. Its surface was not smooth, but covered in tiny hammered images, rows of figures in miniature, strange animals, masked beings and creatures that seemed neither entirely human nor beast. The work was precise, intentional, and alive with meaning, though its meaning was already forgotten by the time it rose from the earth. Word spread quickly, news traveled across Denmark that something miraculous had been unearthed. The horn was sent to the king, Christian IV, who marveled at it, holding it aloft in his court like a relic from another world. But the story did not end there. More than a century later, in 1734, not far from where the first horn had been found, another farmer struck something beneath his field. Once again, gold emerged from the earth, this time the twin to the first horn. The second was longer, its curve more pronounced, but its decorations matched the first rows of figures, masks, warriors and beasts pressed into gold with the hand of a craftsman long gone. Together the horns formed a pair, perfectly matched, each as mysterious as the other. It seemed for a time as though fate had meant for them to be reunited, drawn back together across centuries of silence, and together they became one of Denmark's most prized treasures. Objects both national and mythical, displayed in Copenhagen as proof of the deep roots of the Danish past. Yet the golden horns carried more than beauty. They carried a weight of mystery. What were they for? Who had made them? And why did their surfaces tell stories no one could read? Scholars examined them, artists sketched them, poets wrote of them. The horns entered the heart of Danish imagination. Even Hans Christian Andersen would later mention them in his stories. The golden horns became more than objects. They became a bridge between past and present, myth and reality, silence and sound. But fate is fickle. In 1802, a thief entered the royal treasury in Copenhagen. His name was Niels Heidenreich, a watchmaker fallen on desperate times. Slipping into the vault, he found the horns, still gleaming even after centuries. He smuggled them out, broke them into pieces, and melted them down to make counterfeit coins and trinkets. By the time he was caught, the damage was done. The original horns, so carefully preserved through centuries of burial, were gone. What remains today are not the horns themselves but replicas, faithful reconstructions based on the careful drawings made before their destruction. The originals, the gold hammered by ancient hands, are lost forever. Yet even as copies, the horns remain one of the great mysteries of Europe, and it is their mystery, perhaps even more than their material, that gives them their power. To hold the story of the horns in mind, let us drift further into their world. Imagine standing in the fields where they were first uncovered. The land rolls gently, wide skies stretching above, the sea never far from hearing. The soil is rich, dark, holding secrets from the Iron Age. When these horns were forged, it was around the year 400 CE, in the early centuries of what we call the Migration period, when Germanic tribes moved across Europe, when kingdoms rose and fell with dizzying speed, and when art flourished in strange symbolic forms. The golden horns belonged to this world, a world where myth and ritual bound communities together, where gold was not currency, but a vessel of power, a way to speak to gods and spirits. Each horn tells a story in pictures, though the story is veiled. Rows of tiny figures march across the gold, some wearing helmets, others masks. Animals, serpents, birds, and four-legged beasts win their way between the humans. One figure seems to play a horn, perhaps even one of the golden horns themselves, in an image that mirrors the object it decorates. Another figure wears a mask so large it nearly swallows the face beneath. These are not random images, they are symbols, fragments of ritual, echoes of myths once well known. Some scholars believe the horns were drinking vessels, used in ceremonies to share mead or wine among leaders. Others argue they were sounding instruments, designed to call out across fields and forests during rituals. And still others see them as offerings, created to be buried in the earth, as gifts to unseen powers, never meant to be held again by human hands. But the most haunting idea is this. Perhaps the horns were never meant to be sounded or drunk from at all. Perhaps they were made only to be seen, to carry on their silent golden surfaces, a story that could not be told in words. The loss of the originals deepens the mystery. Without them, we cannot touch the exact gold that once gleamed under the Iron Age sun. What we have are shadows. Replicas that show us form, drawings that hint at detail, and poems that mourn what was lost. And yet the story of the golden horns is not only one of loss, it is also one of endurance. For though the gold itself is gone, the horns live on in the Danish imagination. They are sung about, studied, and remembered. They are proof that sometimes an object's true power is not in the material it is made of, but in the stories it inspires. As the wind moves across the fields of Galahus, one can almost imagine the sound they might have made, low, resonant, like the breath of the earth itself. Or perhaps they never made a sound at all. Perhaps their song was silence, a silence filled with images hammered into gold, a silence that has lasted for more than 1500 years. And so the golden horns still sing, without breath, without gold, without voice. They sing in memory, in imagination, in the quiet persistence of mystery. The desert towers that pointed to nowhere. The desert is a place of endless horizons, where the eye follows lines of sand and stone until they blur into the pale shimmer of heat. In this wide openness, a silence deeper than most can imagine spreads across the land. Yet here, amid that stillness, rise shapes that defy the emptiness. Tall, weathered, and unyielding, towers stand alone in the shifting sands. They reach upward without doors or stairs, markers without clear purpose, their presence demanding questions that the earth refuses to answer. These are the desert towers of Jordan, structures that point to nowhere, yet have endured for centuries, as if to remind us that even silence has memory. The land they inhabit is no stranger to mystery. The Jordanian desert holds traces of kingdoms that flourished and faded, of caravans that crossed from oasis to oasis, and of temples carved straight from living rock. From the city of Petra, with its rose-red facades, to forgotten fortresses that now crumble beneath the sun, this landscape is both archive and tomb, and within it, the towers remain, unmoving, enigmatic, fragments of some greater design that seems lost to time. As we begin to walk through this quiet terrain, imagine the world in which they first rose. The stones are rough, pulled from the desert floor, but stacked with a precision that suggests both knowledge and intent. They are not accidental piles of rock, nor mere watchtowers for defense. Their alignment, their sheer persistence, suggests a meaning beyond simple utility. Yet no scroll explains them, no inscription names their builders. They rise, mute and enduring, and the sands that cover their bases whisper only of abandonment. Travelers who once came across them described the towers with a mix of awe and confusion. Early explorers, wandering scholars, and Bedouin tribes spoke of them in hushed tones. Were they markers for the stars? Were they signals for those crossing trade routes? Were they tombs for forgotten kings, raised not beneath the earth but stretching toward the sky? The questions multiply, while the answers vanish like mist at dawn. The desert towers belong to a category of monument known in archaeology as the desert kites and tower structures scattered across the Levant. Many of these towers appear near ancient trade routes, standing solitary or in small groups. Some are circular, others square, their walls surprisingly thick, as though meant to endure siege or withstand centuries of storms. Yet their interiors are often barren, with no chambers, no carved reliefs, no treasures hidden within. Just hollow silence, enclosed in stone. What purpose does a structure serve when it contains nothing? To the modern mind, shaped by practicality, it is difficult to accept. Buildings hold people, or objects, or meanings we can trace. But the towers seem built for the desert itself, as if the act of raising stone against the horizon was enough. Some archaeologists argue they may have been watchtowers, places where signals could be lit, or scouts stationed to monitor the vast open plains. Yet many of their locations seem ill-suited for surveillance, standing not on high cliffs or near settlements but alone in the wilderness, gazing at horizons where no enemy would come. Others suggest they may have had ritual purposes. Perhaps they were shrines without images, altars without offerings, a kind of architecture meant to interact not with the living but with the unseen. The desert has long been associated with spirits, trials, and transformation. It is a place where silence magnifies thought, and where survival depends on forces beyond human control. A tower, empty yet enduring, may have served as a gesture to the gods of sky and wind, or as a signpost for those seeking meaning in endless landscapes. Imagine standing before one of these towers centuries ago. The desert wind pulls at your clothing, carrying fine grains of sand that sting the skin. The tower looms above, its stones rough-hewn but balanced with surprising precision. It does not invite entry. There is no door to welcome you inside, no window to look through. Instead, it demands you stand at its base and look up, following its lines to the empty sky. In that moment, you feel the strangeness of it, the sense that it belongs not to human need, but to something beyond. The Bedouin tell stories of these towers as markers left by giants who walked the earth before mankind could claim it. Others say they are the ribs of a forgotten palace, the skeletal remains of walls once connected in grandeur, now left standing as fragments. Children, passing by with their families, would sometimes imagine the towers as guardians, silent sentinels whose eyes could not be seen but whose presence could be felt. In the 20th century, when aerial photography became possible, the mystery deepened. From above, the desert revealed patterns invisible at ground level. Lines of stone walls stretched for miles, forming strange funnel-like shapes called desert kites. Near them towers appeared, sometimes at the edges, sometimes seemingly aligned with the pathways of these great structures. Scholars proposed that they were hunting traps, massive designs meant to funnel herds of gazelles and antelope into enclosures. If so, the towers may have played a role in watching, directing, or commemorating these hunts. Yet the scale of the design far exceeded the needs of simple hunting. It suggested ritual, community, and organization at a level long forgotten, and still, the question lingers: why towers? Why reach upward in the desert, when the desert itself already spreads so vast? Perhaps the answer lies not in their height, but in their symbolism. In many ancient cultures, towers were seen as connectors between worlds. To stand tall against the horizon was to bridge the earth and sky, to mark a place where human presence met the divine. In a land where the stars at night blaze brighter than in any city, perhaps the towers were placed to honor the constellations, to trace alignments that spoke of seasons, migrations, or celestial cycles. Night in the desert transforms the towers. By day, they are pale stone against pale sand, shapes almost swallowed by the light. But as the sun sets, their shadows lengthen, and under moonlight they become dark silhouettes rising against the silver glow. Travelers resting nearby might glance at them uneasily, sensing shapes too deliberate to be mere ruins. To lie awake under desert stars and see such towers looming nearby is to feel history pressing close, whispering without words. Over time, the towers began to erode. Wind chipped at their stones, earthquakes shifted their foundations, and the encroaching sands buried their bases. Some collapsed entirely, reduced to little more than heaps of rubble, their outlines guessed at rather than seen, yet others remain, remarkably upright, their walls still standing after 1,000 years or more. It is their persistence that captures the imagination, the stubborn refusal to vanish, as if some vow binds them to remain. Modern archaeologists map them, measure them, attempt to categorize them. Yet the more data they gather, the more the mystery grows. Why do towers appear in clusters in some regions and as solitary figures in others? Why do some align with ancient paths, while others rise in places where no clear purpose exists? Even their dating is uncertain, stretching across centuries, suggesting that multiple cultures may have adopted or repurposed them, each layering new meaning onto old stone. To walk among them today is to walk in a world without explanation. The desert is vast, and human footsteps fade quickly on its shifting sands, yet the towers remain, their silence louder than any story. You can run your hand along their rough walls, feel the warmth of the stone heated by the sun, and still sense that you are an outsider. They do not reveal their secrets easily. They belong not to the present, but to a long chain of human effort and mystery, a chain in which the final link is always missing. It is tempting in such a place to imagine stories. Perhaps a caravan, weary from travel, once stopped at the base of a tower. The leader, pointing upward, might have said to his companions, "This is where the gods rest their eyes." Or perhaps a hunter, standing in wait for gazelle, used the tower as shelter, his spear leaning against its side. Maybe a child once ran circles around it, laughing, unaware that centuries later, others would gaze at the same stones and wonder why they were ever placed. The desert has always carried such echoes. Its silence is not emptiness, but the weight of countless untold lives. The towers amplify that weight. They are not ruins in the traditional sense. There is no collapsed roof, no broken columns, no evidence of rooms once lived in. They are monuments to the unknown, raised for reasons we cannot quite grasp, enduring because perhaps their very purpose was endurance itself. Stand with them long enough, and the mind begins to wander. You notice the shifting light across their surfaces, the way wind carves patterns into their edges, the slow crumble of mortarless joints. You notice how birds sometimes perch at their tops, claiming them as high ground in an otherwise level world. You notice how they cast shadows that lengthen and shrink as the day moves, as though the desert itself is using them as sundials. And perhaps that was their purpose all along, not to hold meaning but to create it, not to declare answers but to provoke questions. To stand in their presence is to feel the human impulse to build, to reach upward even in the harshest conditions, to leave behind traces that outlast memory. In this way, the desert towers do point somewhere, not in space, but in thought. They point to the vastness of human imagination, to the persistence of mystery, and to the enduring truth that not all structures need a reason we can name. As the desert night closes in, the towers fade into silhouette once more. They stand against the horizon like dark brushstrokes painted across the sky. Stars burn overhead, the Milky Way arching in brilliance, and you can almost imagine the builders of these towers gazing at the same heavens. Did they raise their stones to mirror the stars, to mark their passage, to speak to the divine? We may never know. Yet the towers remain, and in their silence lies their power. The desert does not give up its secrets easily, but sometimes it leaves behind a gift, structures that outlast reason, monuments that endure in silence. The towers of Jordan are such a gift. They point to nowhere, and in doing so, they point to everything we cannot yet explain. The carved stone pillow of forgotten dreams. In the far stretches of northern China, where the wind rolls across plains that stretch like an endless sheet of parchment, there rests a mystery both ordinary and extraordinary. It is not a towering monument, not a palace gate, nor a temple reaching toward the skies. Instead, it is something deceptively small, shaped by hands so long gone that even the memory of their names has dissolved. A pillow. Solid, cold, unyielding, carved from stone, yet resting quietly in burial chambers and forgotten storerooms for over 1,000 years. To us, a pillow is softness, comfort, something pressed beneath the head to cradle dreams. But in ancient China, across dynasties that rose and fell like the tides of a great river, pillows carved from clay, wood, jade, porcelain, and stone were seen as more than simple tools of sleep. They were bridges between waking and dreaming, vessels that guarded the spirit in the vulnerable hours of night, and tokens of eternity when the body lay in silence within the grave. This is the story of the carved stone pillow of forgotten dreams. Not just one artifact, but a whole tradition, one that whispered across the centuries in markets, tombs, and households, until it became both a comfort and a riddle. For why would anyone rest their head on stone? Why would such hardness accompany the most delicate of human states? Sleep. And why were so many dreams entrusted not to feathers or cloth, but to cold, carved permanence? Tonight we will wander slowly into that world, a world where sleep itself was seen not merely as rest, but as a passage, an uncertain journey that required guardianship. A world where the stone pillow was not a contradiction, but a necessity. And as we move gently through its history, its meanings, and its forgotten stories, perhaps you too may feel the strange weight of those dreams pressing through time. The earliest stone pillows emerge in the long sweep of the Tang dynasty, sometime around the 7th century. By then, Chinese artisans had mastered the art of ceramics, of jade carving, of lacquer and bronze. Yet in tombs from that period, archaeologists uncover small, simple blocks of stone, sometimes rectangular, sometimes gently curved, their surfaces smooth but never soft. Some bear inscriptions in brush-like script, prayers or invocations for peace. Others are blank, as though the silence of stone itself was considered blessing enough. At first glance it seems almost cruel, a body laid to rest for eternity, with a hard stone pressed beneath the head. Yet in the context of ancient thought, the pillow was not meant for the body alone, it was for the soul. To the Chinese mind, sleep was not passive, it was an act of wandering. The spirit drifted, as fragile as a flame flickering in wind. Dreams were not random, they were messages, visions, journeys through hidden landscapes. And to safeguard that journey, to anchor the sleeper so they might not lose their way, the pillow served as guardian. The hardness of stone was not discomfort, but protection. In its firmness lay stability, permanence, and purity. Just as jade was believed to preserve the body from decay, so stone was believed to preserve the spirit from being scattered. A soft pillow might collapse, mold, or rot, but stone endured. It kept watch across nights and centuries. In time, this practice expanded, growing elaborate during the Song dynasty. Workshops specialized in pillow making, crafting them from porcelain with intricate glazework, or shaping them from stone with careful carving. Some were molded into the forms of animals, a tiger, a phoenix, a crouching lion. Others bore scenes from folk tales or symbols of fortune. Yet whether animal or abstract, their role remained the same, to cradle not merely the head, but the passage into the dream world. And then, in tombs, stone pillows became companions for eternity. To lie forever with one's head upon such an object was to ensure that even in death, the spirit might rest peacefully, dream safely, and perhaps wake into another life. Imagine then, a burial chamber uncovered in the dry earth near Luoyang. Within lies the lacquered coffin of a woman who lived 9 centuries ago, her silks long faded, her hairpins rusted green. At the base of her skull, resting neatly as though she had only just lain down to sleep, lies a pillow of gray stone, carved with the faint outline of clouds, its edges smoothed by a craftsman's patient hand. It has not moved in all those centuries. Archaeologists lift it carefully, and though her body has decayed, the pillow remains almost unmarked. Cold, silent, waiting. What dreams were carved into its silence? Did her family believe it would grant her visions of reunion in the afterlife? Did they fear that without it her soul would wander restless? Or did they simply follow tradition, without ever asking why their ancestors had done the same? There are theories, whispered among scholars. Some suggest stone pillows cooled the body in summer heat, offering not only symbolic but practical relief. Others argue they corrected posture, aligning the neck for better breathing, a primitive understanding of medicine. Yet even these explanations cannot fully account for the spiritual layers etched into them, because many pillows bear inscriptions that speak not of health or temperature, but of dreams. A Song-era ceramic pillow discovered in Hainan carries the words, "Sleep in peace, dream in harmony." Another, shaped like a lotus flower, bears the inscription, "With purity, one enters the realm of immortals." These were not decorations, they were instructions, charms, silent prayers. And always, beneath the words and forms, the pillow itself was stone. Immutable, enduring, silent. We can picture the pillow not only in tombs, but in daily life. A scholar in the Song dynasty, bent over scrolls of poetry by candlelight, would eventually lean back and rest his head upon a pillow carved from marble or glazed ceramic. Hard though it may seem, his head found its place upon the curve, and he drifted into sleep. To him, comfort was not softness but clarity. The hard pillow was thought to sharpen dreams, to clear the mind of clutter, to align the body with the order of the cosmos. What did he dream of? Perhaps of immortals, strolling along mountain peaks, or of rivers that flowed upward into the stars. Perhaps he saw omens, hints of future fortune, or simply the deep silence of the void. And upon waking, he may have remembered with a clarity that no feather pillow could provide. Over centuries, pillows of many forms were carved. Stone, porcelain, lacquer, even jade. Yet the stone ones carried a special weight, a gravity that seemed inseparable from the earth itself. They were not luxuries, not delicate trinkets, but foundations of a belief that sleep and death were siblings, and that both required guardians. As we linger on this thought, let us drift deeper into one such pillow's imagined journey. Picture it, quarried from a mountainside of pale stone, cut into blocks by laborers whose songs echoed against cliffs. One block is set aside, carried on carts through dusty roads to the workshop of an artisan. There, in a dim space scented with resin and clay, the craftsman studies it. He lifts his chisel, tapping gently at first, then carving steadily. Hours stretch into days, and slowly, a shape emerges. A rectangle with sloping sides, its surface smoothed, its edges softened, as though meant to welcome a resting head. Upon its top, he engraves the faint lines of clouds, symbols of drifting across realms. When complete, it is sold to a family preparing for burial. They believe this object will accompany their ancestor into eternity. They lower it into the tomb, placing it beneath the head of the deceased. Then the chamber is sealed, darkness swallowing all. The pillow remains there as dynasties rise and fall above, as wars sweep across valleys, as cities burn and are rebuilt. The body decays, the coffin crumbles, yet the stone remains, bearing its silent duty. 1,000 years later, hands pry open the tomb once more, torchlight flickers, and archaeologists lean in, discovering what has endured. The pillow, waiting, untouched, still holding the invisible dreams of one who lived long ago. The tradition of the stone pillow eventually waned, giving way to softer comforts, though porcelain pillows remained popular even into the Ming and Qing dynasties. Yet the carved stone pillows retained a certain aura, and today they sit in museums, rows of them, varied in shape yet strangely unified. Visitors peer at them curiously, struggling to imagine resting their heads upon such hardness. Few linger long, most pass by, but those who pause sense a deeper truth. That these are not simply pillows, but relics of a worldview in which every aspect of life, even sleep, was tied to eternity, and in that, they whisper to us still, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the faint echo of forgotten dreams. For every pillow once held a dreamer, a sleeper, whose visions are now lost, and yet the pillow remains, as though waiting for us to remember. When we step back and let the silence of stone settle around us, we realize that these artifacts are not strange at all. They are echoes of our own longing, for rest, for safety, for continuity. We too seek comfort in the night, and wonder at the meaning of our dreams. We too fear the frailty of life, and hope for something that endures. The carved stone pillow is in its own way a mirror. It shows us that even in antiquity, humans sought to anchor themselves between the shifting tides of life and death, waking and dreaming. And perhaps, as we imagine those who once rested upon such pillows, we might sense their presence faintly, dreamers across centuries, still lying quietly upon stone, their dreams carried onward into eternity. The giant footprints pressed into rock. Beneath the endless skies of South Africa, where horizons seem to stretch beyond time itself, lies a place that whispers of something both impossible and strangely intimate. Among the rolling hills and ancient stone formations, Tucked away in a quiet valley brushed by wind and silence, there is a footprint. Not a recent one, not pressed by human souls into soft earth, but a colossal impression stamped into solid rock itself. Locals call it the footprint of God, and from a distance it looks unmistakable. 5 broad toes, an arch, a heel, all carved as if by some immeasurable weight upon the land long ago. The print measures nearly 4 feet in length, far beyond any human stride, as though it belonged to a being from a forgotten age, one who walked the earth with steps that left behind permanent echoes. The story of this footprint begins not in books but in whispers. Shepherds tending goats along the rocky slopes would pause, glance at the strange indentation, and lower their voices. Children were led there by curious elders, who half smiled while telling them that giants once roamed this place. And travelers, upon arriving, would often find themselves frozen, caught between the rational explanations they carried with them, and the overwhelming feeling that they were standing before something that defied logic. The land itself sets the stage. South Africa is rich with geology so old that it predates the very concept of history. Rocks here are billions of years in age, older than life as we understand it, shaped by volcanic heat and ancient seas. Yet within this ancient fabric of stone lies the impression of a footprint that seems too precise, too deliberate, to be dismissed as simple erosion. When you stand before it, you can trace the line of the toes, the curve of the ball, the gentle slope toward the heel. It looks alive, as if someone or something had just stepped there. The print preserved forever. No one knows exactly how long people have been visiting this footprint. Oral traditions speak of it as a marker of beings who came before humans, titans whose strides created valleys, whose hands carved rivers, whose shadows stretched across entire horizons. To the Sand people among the world's oldest continuous cultures, land and legend are inseparable. They do not see this as an accident, but as a reminder that the world is deeper than what is measured. Stories from their traditions describe great figures who shaped the land with their bodies, leaving imprints that endure. The footprint to them is not just a curiosity, it is a connection to the first beings, to the shaping of the world itself. Yet in modern times, scholars and geologists have looked upon it with a different eye. They point to processes of natural erosion, where softer rock wears away faster than harder sections, creating shapes that can resemble what our minds most easily recognize, like faces in clouds, animals in flames, or in this case, a footprint pressed into stone. They call it pareidolia, the tendency of the human mind to find patterns where none were intended. But standing before the footprint, many have struggled to fully embrace that explanation. For how often does erosion create something so perfect, so symmetrical, so eerily human, yet impossibly large? This tension between myth and science, between wonder and explanation, is what gives the footprint its power. You can imagine travelers approaching it, their footsteps crunching softly over gravel, their breath slowing as the impression comes into view. They lean closer, maybe even kneel, running their fingers over the ridges, tracing the outline of each toe. The surface of the rock is rough, worn by centuries of wind and rain, but the impression remains clear, sharper than the surrounding stone. It is as though the land itself resisted erosion within that sacred boundary, preserving the memory of something long gone. Legends have sprouted from this site, each colored by the culture and time that told them. Some say it was made by a god, striding across the earth in the days before humans, marking the stone as a reminder of divine presence. Others whisper that it was the footprint of a giant who fell long ago, his body now hidden beneath the earth, but whose step still lingers as proof of his size. A more unsettling tale says the footprint belongs not to something that walked in peace, but to a hunter of worlds, a being who pressed into stone as casually as humans press into sand, watching the land yield beneath their steps. And in every version, the footprint is not just an object but a threshold, a place where the line between the human scale and something far greater becomes thin. Scientists who visit the site often remark on the geology. The footprint is carved into granite-like stone, some of the oldest rock on Earth. The shape seems resistant to erosion compared to the surroundings, as though preserved by coincidence. Some propose that this is a result of fracturing within the stone, where weaknesses created an outline that resembles the human foot. Yet others quietly admit that it seems too exact, too clean. While erosion can create remarkable shapes, the footprint feels deliberate. When viewed in photographs, one might dismiss it as a trick of angle or shadow. But when seen in person, the scale and detail strike deeper. Even skeptics find themselves standing longer than expected, staring, running through possibilities, feeling something unspoken pressing at the edge of explanation. And it is here, in this unsettled space between knowing and unknowing, that the footprint becomes more than geology or myth. It becomes a mirror of human longing, the longing to connect to something larger, to feel the presence of what came before. Standing before the footprint, you can almost imagine the sound of a step that shook the ground, the weight of something unimaginable pressing down. Your mind might wander to ancient ages, when creatures larger than imagination roamed. Could it be a relic from a time forgotten? Could giants have truly walked here? Beings whose stories slipped into myth because memory could not hold their scale. As the sun arcs above this valley, the footprint changes in light. In the morning, shadows pool in the indentations, making the toes sharp and unmistakable. At noon, with the sun directly overhead, it looks flatter, more blended, as if fading into the stone. And at dusk, as the shadows lengthen, the footprint seems to deepen again. The heel sinking into darkness, the toes stretching toward fading light. It feels alive, as though the land itself breathes with memory, reminding us that stone is not lifeless but part of a story still unfolding. Visitors often leave in silence. They do not always share their thoughts aloud, perhaps because words falter before something that feels so vast. Some feel awe, some feel unease, others a calm sense of connection. A few claim that standing beside the footprint makes them dizzy, as if they have stepped outside of time for a moment, touching a truth older than language. The surrounding valley deepens this impression. Rolling hills stretch into the distance, dotted with scrub and grasses that sway with the wind. Birds call in the distance, their cries carrying over open space. The air is clear, and the silence is profound, broken only by natural sounds that seem amplified against the stillness. To stand by the footprint is to be enveloped by solitude, to feel the vastness of time pressing quietly around you. Perhaps what makes the footprint linger in memory is not whether it was made by giants or erosion, but that it demands us to pause, to consider scale beyond our own. Humans are small in the face of geologic time, yet we are drawn to seek meaning, to weave stories, to place ourselves within the larger pattern. The footprint gives us that opportunity. It is at once an enigma and a canvas for imagination. It is geology made myth, and myth made tangible, and as you picture it now, stone pressed into the shape of a human step, impossibly large, enduring across ages, you might feel the quiet pull it exerts, not to explain it, but to sit with it, to let your thoughts soften, to let the boundaries blur between what is real and what is remembered. In that stillness, the footprint becomes what it has always been, a reminder that the earth itself holds secrets beyond explanation, waiting in silence, patient as stone. The silver mirror that refused the sun. There are places in the world where objects defy the very nature of their creation. Some do not simply endure time, but resist it. Some do not merely reflect the world around them, but deny it. And deep in the hills of Italy, among landscapes where olive groves stretch like patient brushstrokes across the earth, where stone villages cling to their mountainsides as if unwilling to fall into the valleys below, there is said to be a mirror unlike any other. It is called the silver mirror that refused the sun, not because it was broken, not because it was blackened or covered in soot, but because, for as long as anyone had known, the sun itself, the great blazing crown of heaven, the light that bends even the deepest shadow, never appeared in it. No matter how brightly it struck the room, no matter how high or low the rays might fall, no sunbeam was ever caught upon that polished face. And so the villagers whispered, perhaps the mirror was made not to show the world as it is, but the world as it hides itself. The story begins in a small mountain town, the kind of place where roofs are stacked like stone steps along the slope, and where time moves more slowly than the rivers that carve their way through the valleys. The mirror was kept in a house of weathered stone. Its frame was carved of wood so dark it seemed almost charred, curling with designs of vines and serpents, their bodies woven into knots. It was neither large nor small, just tall enough for a person to stand before it, to search for themselves in its depths. And yet to look into it was not to find comfort, for while the room around you might appear, the chair, the shutters, the cool white plaster of the wall, there would always be one thing missing, the golden warmth of the sun. The reflection showed the world in silvery tones, as if daylight had never been invented, as if the earth lived forever beneath a pale and quiet sky. It unsettled travelers who came upon it, and yet it fascinated them too. How could a mirror choose what it would or would not hold? Generations before, the story claimed, it had been forged in Venice. The glassblowers there were masters, working in furnaces that glowed like miniature suns themselves, pouring molten brilliance into vessels, mirrors, chandeliers, beads that caught every shade of the rainbow. But the silver mirror was no ordinary Venetian craft. It was said to have been commissioned for a noblewoman whose name had long since been forgotten. She had demanded a mirror unlike any other, a mirror that did not lie, that did not flatter, that would not give back the warm glow of a face touched by light. Some say she feared beauty itself. Others whispered she sought to trap truth within the glass. Whatever the reason, the mirror was made, but what was poured into it was not only fire and silver, something else crept inside. Centuries passed. The noblewoman's house fell into ruin. The mirror was taken, stolen, sold, traded, lost, and rediscovered, until at last it came to rest in the mountain town where it still sat, leaning against the wall of a house that overlooked the valley. It was not locked away, it was not worshipped, it was simply there, as if waiting. But if you asked the people of the town about it, they would tell you that time moved differently when you stood before it, that laughter seemed softer, that colors seemed duller, and above all, they would remind you, you will never see the sun in it. Scholars had come, of course. Men with notebooks and careful hands, measuring, recording, polishing, testing. But no matter what they tried, the mirror remained unchanged. The sun passed by as if it had never been born. One scholar wrote in frustration, "The mirror gives back the room, but robs it of its day. I cannot escape the feeling that I am seeing the world not as it is, but as it would be if light itself were denied us." Yet for all its strangeness, no harm had come from it. It did not shatter, it did not whisper, it simply endured. And so the town lived with it, the way one lives with an old superstition, a shadow at the edge of the hearth. Some avoided it entirely. Some could not resist visiting, stepping into the house and standing before it, daring to see themselves stripped of daylight. Those who did often left unsettled. For the mirror did not show them ugly, nor did it make them older than they were. But in the absence of sunlight, the reflection seemed distant, hollow, as if they were already a memory of themselves. Travelers spoke of it far beyond the valley. They called it cursed, they called it holy. Some believed it was not a mirror at all, but a window into a world where the sun had died, where silver light was all that remained. But no matter the tale, one truth endured: the silver mirror refused the sun. Imagine it now, the quiet house, the creak of its wooden beams, the faint smell of smoke from the hearth, and in the corner, the tall mirror, leaning as though it has grown weary of centuries of waiting. The shutters are opened. Sunlight floods the room. It spills across the floor, warming the stones, catching in the dust that drifts lazily through the air. Every surface gleams: the chair, the glass bottles, the brass handle of the door. Every surface except the mirror. There the world is rendered pale. The light stops just before it, as though the mirror itself is a mouth that swallows it whole. Some say it is a trick of the glass. Others that its silver backing was made with some forgotten alloy. But there are whispers too of something older, of a pact made when the glass was first cooled. Of words spoken not by the craftsman, but by something that leaned close in the furnace's glow. For sometimes, when the room is empty, the villagers claim they hear a faint hum from within the glass, like the sound of breath drawn in, but never released, as though the mirror remembers the fire that gave it shape, as though it waits to return it. If you were to stand before it long enough, you might notice a strange thing. The longer you look, the quieter the world seems. Not silent, not empty, but softened. The ticking of clocks slows. The footsteps in the street outside fade, and you are left with only your own reflection, pale and distant, staring back as though from another side. Some who lingered there too long said that they dreamed of endless silver plains, where no sun rose and no shadows ever fell. A place of stillness, a place of waiting. Yet always, when morning came, they would wake, and the mirror would remain, silent, patient, watching. The silver mirror that refused the sun. A mystery, a riddle in glass and silver. A reminder that not all reflections are given freely, and not all light may be trusted. It sits even now, in its little house among the hills, where olive trees sway and rivers carve their patient paths, waiting, as it always has, holding back the sun, keeping something else within. A burial chamber, lit by eternal flame. The desert has a silence that is not simply the absence of sound, but rather the presence of something vast and immeasurable. It is a quiet that feels older than stone, deeper than oceans, and in certain forgotten places, that silence holds secrets that do not easily give themselves away. Among the stretches of sand and scattered ridges of rock that ripple across the Iranian plateau, there are stories whispered of a burial chamber unlike any other, a place where, even in the depths of darkness, a flame burns without end, a fire that no wind extinguishes, no hand rekindles, no offering feeds, a light that has shone for centuries, perhaps millennia, as if the desert itself was guarding a lantern hidden from the world. This tale is not a loud one. It does not rise with battle cries, nor end with triumphs carved into stone. Instead, it drifts like sand blown across a forgotten threshold, waiting for someone with patience to notice. And so tonight, let us move gently, step by step, into that story. The first mentions of the burial chamber appear not in chronicles of kings, nor in songs of court poets, but in the notes of wandering merchants. Along the Silk Road, where caravans traveled between Samarkand and Persepolis, there were whispers told in low voices around campfires. Men who carried silks, spices, and obsidian beads claimed that deep in the desert of Lut, in a barren stretch where no water flows, there stood a chamber carved into the earth itself. It was not a palace, they said, nor a temple where prayers rang. It was smaller, humbler, yet strange, because when the travelers stumbled upon it, they found light pouring faintly from within. Not torchlight, not the flicker of oil, but something steady, golden, and eternal. Most dismissed it as a trick of the desert. Heat often bends light into illusions, shaping lakes where none exist, villages that dissolve when approached. Yet those who drew closer swore the glow remained. Some were too frightened to enter. Others stepped across the threshold, only to emerge pale and shaken, claiming that the flame was real, that it hung in the air above a burial chamber, burning without wood, without wick, without smoke. To understand why such a thing might exist, one must turn to the land itself. Iran has long been a place where fire holds deep meaning. Long before the rise of Islam, the ancient Persians followed Zoroaster, a prophet whose vision shaped one of the world's oldest religions. In Zoroastrian temples, fire was not merely warmth or light, but the living symbol of truth, purity, and divine presence. Priests tended sacred flames that had burned without interruption for generations. Even today, in quiet corners of the world, there are fire temples where descendants of those ancient guardians still keep their watch, feeding the flames as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. But the flame in this chamber, if it truly exists, was said to be different. It had no priest, no attendant, no offering of oil. It burned alone, as if the stone walls themselves were breathing out light. Some claimed it was placed there by the Magi, the wise priests of old. Others believed it was no man's doing at all, but a gift, or perhaps a warning from something deeper, older than religion. Centuries passed, and the burial chamber slipped between legend and silence. Maps never marked it. Kingdoms rose and fell without naming it. Yet in the villages that ringed the Lut Desert, people continued to murmur about it. Farmers said that once in a generation, a wanderer would vanish into the sands searching for the chamber, never to return. Bedouin tribes spoke of nights when a faint orange glow seemed to shimmer on the horizon, though when they followed it nothing was there. By the time European explorers began crossing Persia in the 19th century, such stories reached their ears. Some dismissed them outright, chalking them up to folklore. Yet a few, curious and perhaps restless for discovery, wrote of their attempts to find it. One such account, buried in the margins of a French traveler's journal, tells of a shepherd who guided him toward a low ridge where the rocks jutted like broken teeth. The shepherd claimed that beneath those stones lay a stairway carved downward into the earth. But when they arrived, all they found was sand, sand and more sand. The entrance was gone, swallowed by the shifting desert. The traveler left convinced that perhaps the chamber had been sealed long ago, and only the stories remained. But what if the stories are true? What if somewhere, hidden beneath the sands of Lut, a flame still burns? Imagine walking into such a chamber. The air would be heavy, still, and strangely warm. The walls would be cut from stone, rough and unadorned, save for faint carvings worn smooth by centuries of dust. And there, in the center, hovering above a low platform of rock, would be the flame itself. Neither roaring nor flickering, but steady, like the heart of the earth given visible form. No smoke would curl upward, no wax would drip, no scent of oil would linger, only the golden light, casting soft shadows across the chamber, as though it had been burning since before human memory began. Some say that within the chamber lie bodies, sarcophagi of figures whose names are long forgotten, warriors perhaps, or kings. Others believe the chamber holds only one figure, a priest of fire, buried with the eternal flame as his soul's companion. There are even those who whisper that no body rests there at all, that the chamber is not a tomb, but a prison, holding something bound beneath the flame's watch. In times past, locals treated the tale with caution. To approach the chamber was to risk more than thirst or exhaustion. It was to risk being seen by something that should remain unseen, a desert spirit perhaps, or the wrath of forgotten gods. That fear was enough to keep most away, yet the idea of the eternal flame has drawn others closer, again and again. Not treasure seekers, for there are no riches promised within, but pilgrims of curiosity, those who feel the pull of mysteries unsolved. The kind of people who stand in ruins long after others have left, staring at the way stone holds shadow, wondering what it has witnessed, and perhaps that is why the story endures, because it speaks not only to the past, but to a hunger that still stirs in us today. A hunger to know what lies beneath the sand, what waits in the silence, what flame might burn where none should. The burial chamber, whether myth or memory, belongs to a lineage of wonders, scattered across Iran. From the towering columns of Persepolis to the fire temples of Yazd, from the rock tombs of Naqsh Rostam to the deep cisterns carved to catch the desert's rare rains, the land is filled with places where human hands shape stone to hold eternity, and sometimes within those stones eternity seems to answer. If the chamber is ever found again, what would it mean? Scientists might explain the flame as a natural vent of burning gas, fed by the earth beneath. The desert, after all, is laced with hidden reservoirs of fuel that can ignite if sparked. The flame could be the world's slow exhale, mistaken for magic by those who first found it. But explanations do not erase wonder. Even if it were natural, still it would be no less haunting to step into a place where the earth has kept its torch alight through countless seasons of sun and storm. And if it is not natural, if it truly is eternal, untouched by wind or stone, then it would be something far stranger and far older than we know how to name. The desert holds its silence, as it always has. Whether the chamber lies buried beneath dunes or collapsed beneath forgotten ridges, its story burns on in the minds of those who hear it. A flame without smoke, a tomb without time, a light that should not be. And perhaps that is enough, that we carry the story like a lantern of our own, a reminder that not everything must be explained, not every secret unsealed. Some mysteries live best when they flicker quietly, untouched, like a flame in the dark that refuses to die. The hidden cavern of faces painted in ash. Beneath the quiet hills of Spain, where olive groves stretch across the land like a green and silver sea, there lies a story carved not into books but into stone itself. It is not a story of kings or courts nor of battles or glory. It is older, stranger, and quieter, something that sits just beyond the reach of explanation. This is the story of a cavern hidden away in the folds of the earth, a place where the walls remember more than human words can tell. A cavern where hundreds of faces painted in ash and soot, still gaze outward from the rock, staring into the darkness as if waiting for someone to return. The cave was first stumbled upon by chance, though in truth, the earth does not give up its secrets easily. The opening was barely visible, no larger than a hollow in the hillside, covered over with thickets and the tangled roots of oak trees. Shepherds had passed by it for generations, never guessing what lay beneath their feet. It was only when a storm washed away part of the slope that the dark mouth revealed itself. From the outside, it seemed nothing more than a fissure, a crack in stone, but those who dared to crawl inside found themselves descending into chambers that twisted deep underground. And there, in the pale glow of flickering torches, they saw the faces, hundreds of them, painted in ash mixed with animal fat, black against the pale limestone, some smeared and fading, others sharp as though drawn only yesterday. The faces had no bodies. They were only heads, oval outlines, hollow eyes, sometimes wide open, sometimes only thin slits, as if squinting against a light no one else could see. Mouths were drawn in different ways, some smiling faintly, others stretched into grimaces, others left blank, closed in silence. The strange thing was not only that there were so many, but that each face was different. No two were alike. Every one seemed to hold its own mood, its own gaze, as if the cavern had captured not a crowd, but individuals, each frozen in its own eternal watch. Scholars came in time, archaeologists, anthropologists, historians. They brought their lanterns, their brushes, their instruments, and their questions. But for every answer they sought, the cavern gave only more mystery. For who had made these faces, and why in ash? A material that fades, a material that does not last, when stone carvings would have endured the ages far more easily. Some suggested rituals. Perhaps it was a place where the living came to speak with the dead, painting their ancestors' faces so they might be remembered. Others thought it a shrine to spirits, each face a guardian, marking the cavern as a sacred boundary. There were even those who whispered of older things, darker things, powers that demanded offerings of ash and silence. But the cavern itself gave no names. There were no inscriptions, no carvings of tools, no remains of offerings, only the faces, and the stillness, and the faint scent of soot that seemed never to leave the air. When one walks deeper into the cavern, the strangeness grows. The walls narrow, then widen again, opening into chambers like stone wombs. In one chamber the faces crowd close together, so near that they almost overlap, as though pressing forward in desperation. In another chamber, they are spaced apart, each isolated, each staring from its own corner of wall. And then, at the farthest end of the cavern, there is one face unlike all the others. It is larger, twice the size of a human head. Its eyes are not hollow circles but long vertical slits, and its mouth is not a line but an open oval, as though forever speaking or forever gasping. The ash here is darker, richer, as though layered over and over again. Torchlight seems to catch in its hollowed mouth, giving the impression that it is whispering, though the cavern remains silent. The people who first entered the cavern left quickly, unsettled. They claimed that the air inside seemed heavy, that sounds echoed too long, that the flicker of torchlight played tricks, making the faces appear to shift, their eyes following every movement. One man swore he heard breathing, soft but steady, though none of the others admitted to it, and when they emerged, blinking in the daylight, they swore never to go back. But of course others did. Curiosity always returns to places where the earth hides something so strange. Explorers, scientists, travelers, they all descended into the cavern, and all carried away the same impression, that the faces were not only decorations, not only remnants of an ancient ritual, but something more, something watching. One archaeologist noted how fresh some of the ash looked. When he touched it, his finger came away black, as though it had been painted only days before. but tests showed the pigments were thousands of years old, preserved somehow in the stillness of the cavern air. And yet the more they studied, the less they seemed to know. No one could place the cavern firmly in history. No artifacts of pottery, no bones, no tools were found. The faces existed outside of time, ageless, unanchored, a mystery with no context. Some placed them in the Paleolithic age, imagining nomadic hunters painting the walls as part of a forgotten ceremony. Others believed them younger, from a time when Rome touched Iberia, or even later, but nothing fit. The villagers who lived nearby did not like to speak of it. When asked, they only shook their heads, muttered prayers, and turned away. Some said the cavern had always been a place avoided, that their grandparents and great-grandparents had warned children not to go near the hill, for the earth there was not empty but full of voices, full of memories, full of eyes that never closed. And so, the cavern remained. Silent, waiting, a hollow in the earth where faces stared out of the stone, their stories untold, their purpose unrevealed. If you imagine yourself there, torch in hand, the darkness pressing close, the air cool and still, you can almost feel what those first wanderers must have felt. The sound of your own breathing echoes, every step stirs dust that has not moved in centuries, and the faces, drawn in ash, seem almost alive, some welcoming, some stern, some sorrowful. It is as though you are not a visitor, but an intruder, as though the cavern remembers every presence that has passed through, and weighs you among them. The silence is the heaviest part, not the silence of empty rooms, but the silence of something that waits to be spoken, something just beyond hearing. Some say that if you stand long enough in the final chamber, by the great face with the open mouth, you will begin to hear faint whispers, not words, not voices, but something like the breath of ash itself. What do the faces want? To be remembered, to be left alone, to speak but lacking a tongue, to speak only through eyes and lines of soot. The cavern will not answer. It cannot. It gives only what it has always given. Faces painted in ash, silent as stone, eternal as shadow. And so, the story of the Cavern of Faces remains one of those mysteries too strange to fit neatly into history, too human to dismiss, too otherworldly to explain. It is a reminder that the earth holds more than bones and pottery. It holds memory. It holds silence. It holds questions that linger like ash, faint, black, and clinging, long after the fire is gone. And when you leave, crawling back into the daylight, you carry something with you. Not soot, not dust, but the gaze of those ash-painted eyes, watching from the darkness, following until the hillside swallows them again. The cavern does not call you back, but neither does it release you entirely, for once you have seen the faces painted in ash, you will always remember them, and perhaps, in some way, they remember you too. The pyramid that hid a river beneath it. Beneath the wide and windswept lands of Sudan, where the desert runs endless, and the horizon stretches in ripples of golden heat, there lies a story that has long been whispered, half in myth and half in memory. It is the story of a pyramid unlike any other, built by hands that belonged to a kingdom now faded into sand. A pyramid that did not rise merely as a tomb, but as a secret above a flowing vein of water, a hidden river that has slumbered in silence for centuries. The land of Sudan is filled with pyramids, though far fewer people know of them than those in Egypt. These pyramids, smaller yet no less commanding, rise from the desert plains of Nubia, the homeland of the Kushite kings. They are sharper in profile, steeper in their sides, built to pierce the desert sky like daggers of stone. Among them are ruins worn by time, stones cracked by the sun and sand, yet each whispers of a time when kings and queens of Kush ruled from Napata and Meroe, sending their power rippling across the Nile Valley. But there is one pyramid that has never quite fit the pattern. Its placement is odd, distant from the clusters of royal tombs. Its foundations seem deeper than others, sunk as if hiding something more than burial chambers. And from beneath its weathered stones, those who have approached in quiet hours claim they can hear a faint hum, almost like the resonance of water moving in darkness. A river, some say, sealed beneath it, hidden away by ancient engineers whose knowledge has long since been buried in dust. To understand such a place, one must walk slowly back through time, to the days when this desert was not only a desert, but also a green and thriving land. The Nile, swollen with summer floods, would spill life across its banks, and the people of Kush would draw from its waters to grow their grains and raise their cattle. But far from the great river itself, in the harsher reaches where the rains were scarce, water was more precious than gold. Perhaps it was this need, or perhaps something more symbolic, that led to the creation of the pyramid above the hidden river. Imagine, if you will, standing before it in its earliest days. The desert is quieter then, the sand not yet broken by centuries of shifting winds. The pyramid is sharp and new, its surface of cut sandstone blocks gleaming under the sun, its capstone reflecting golden light. Around it gather priests in linen robes, their voices raised in chant as incense curls into the dry air. They are not only burying a king, but binding him to the life-giving essence of water, ensuring that his spirit will rest forever at the threshold between stone and stream. Step closer, and one might notice the difference in its design. Beneath the outer layers of stone, hidden passages spiral down not only to a chamber for the sarcophagus, but deeper still to a vaulted hall where the sound of trickling water echoes faintly. There the builders had carved a channel, directing the flow of an underground stream into a pool that shimmered like liquid obsidian in the torchlight. To the ancient mind, this was no ordinary river. It was the eternal current, the secret underworld Nile, flowing through darkness as the spirit of the king traveled to join the ancestors. But time moves as it always does, steady and relentless. Dynasties rose and fell, sandstorms swept across the land, and slowly the pyramid was forgotten. Its entrance collapsed, its capstone stolen, its name erased. The desert buried it inch by inch, until only a few jagged stones broke the surface of the dunes. And with its burial, the secret river beneath it vanished from memory. Yet even silence does not erase all traces. In the villages near Meroe, where the blacksmiths once worked their iron furnaces, stories still drift in the evening air. They tell of a pyramid where water still sings underground, where travelers who sleep too near it dream of cool rivers flowing in moonlit caverns. Some say the river beneath is cursed, guarded by spirits who resent any hand that tries to drink from it. Others whisper that it is blessed, that to touch the water is to glimpse eternity. Centuries later, in the age when explorers and archaeologists began tracing the outlines of Nubia, a few stumbled upon this pyramid. They mapped its dimensions, noting its strange depth. They dug along its base and found traces of channels carved with deliberate hands. But when they tried to descend, the passages collapsed, the stones sealing tighter as if guarding a secret that refused to be revealed. Their notes, scattered in journals, speak of hearing water where no river should flow. Picture the desert night around such a ruin. The stars burn fiercely in the ink-black sky, clearer here than in almost any other place on Earth. The wind brushes across the sand with a sound like distant waves, and in that silence, a lone traveler sitting at the base of the pyramid might close his eyes and swear that beneath his body there is movement, a slow, pulsing rhythm like the heart of the earth itself. Was the river real? Science might say yes, pointing to underground aquifers that run unseen beneath Sudan's deserts. Some aquifers date back tens of thousands of years, storing water from rains that fell when the Sahara was still green. For the builders of the pyramid, to discover such a source, to shape stone around it, would have been to hold life itself within a tomb. Yet the way they shaped it, the way they veiled it in ceremony, turned a resource into a mystery. Perhaps they knew something we have forgotten, that water is not only for drinking, but also for dreaming, that beneath the surface of the earth flows a mirror of the world above, a hidden current carrying memory, carrying spirit. In linking their king's tomb with that current, they were ensuring that his reign would never dry away, that his name would ripple in silence forever. It is tempting to wish the pyramid could be excavated fully, its chambers opened, its underground river mapped. But part of its power lies in what remains hidden. The desert has kept it for this long, wrapping its sands like a cloak around both stone and water, and perhaps it should remain so, its hum only heard by those willing to pause in the quiet and listen. Because in the end, the pyramid that hid a river beneath it is more than a monument. It is a reminder that even in the driest deserts, water flows unseen, that beneath the most barren silence, life can still whisper, that the people of long ago built not only with stone, but with vision, weaving their beliefs into the very earth. And so, if you walk someday among the Nubian pyramids, pause when you see one that stands a little apart, its stones worn but still leaning sharp against the sky. Sit near its base as the sun falls low, casting long shadows across the sand. Close your eyes. You may hear nothing, or you may hear a sound like the faintest trickle, carrying across centuries, telling you that below your feet, a hidden river still flows, guarded by a pyramid, carrying the dreams of kings into eternity. The bronze hands that reached for the sky. There are places in the world where stories linger longer than the people who once told them. In the high plateaus and rugged valleys of Central Asia, where the land stretches out beneath the vast skies of Uzbekistan, there is a legend of two bronze hands, monuments of uncanny shape and proportion, raised as if frozen in the act of reaching for something beyond sight. They stand not in the crowded heart of a city, nor among the ruins of the Silk Road's more famous caravansars, but alone, in a place where the wind speaks more clearly than human tongues. Travelers who came across them centuries ago described them not as statues, nor as tools, nor as weapons, but as something caught between all three, human, in form, yet impossibly immense, with fingers elongated and palms tilted upward toward the heavens. No inscription explained them, no record of their making survived, and yet across generations, shepherds and wanderers swore that in the silence of dusk, or the hollow of the night, the bronze surface seemed to thrum, as though echoing a sound long lost, a vibration that pulsed not through the air, but through the ground itself. It was said that no bird would perch upon them, no snow would cling to their palms, and even the desert's dust seemed to shy away, slipping off their surface as if denied. To begin with the story of the bronze hands, one must also begin with the land that held them. The steppes of Uzbekistan, ancient and unending, have long been a meeting ground for nomads, traders, and empires. The Silk Road's arteries ran across this soil, bringing silks from China, spices from India, glass from Rome, and secrets from every place in between. Kingdoms rose, blossomed briefly, and fell, leaving behind citadels and ruins that time has softened. Beneath the sands and soil, archaeologists today uncover fragments of pottery, lost coins, and bricks that still bear the fingerprints of those who molded them. Yet the bronze hands do not belong to any single empire that history names. They are older than the Sogdians, older than the Kushans, older even than the first scribbled marks of record on clay. The villagers nearest to the site had their own stories, that the hands were left by giants punished and frozen in place, that they were a warning set by ancient gods to remind mortals not to overreach, or that they were simply the remains of a ritual too powerful to be fully forgotten. Some claimed that the hands pointed not to the sky, but beyond it, toward a realm unreachable by mortals. The first written account of the hands comes from a Persian chronicler who wandered the steppes in the 11th century. His manuscript, now brittle and incomplete, describes his arrival at a wide valley where the earth seemed burned and hollowed. There he wrote of 2 hands of metal, larger than houses, raised toward the sun, with joints smoother than the water-polished stones of a river. He noted that his companions dared not touch them. One of them, a bold youth, struck the bronze with the hilt of his sword, only to collapse moments later, his breath shallow, his body limp. He survived, though he never spoke again. The chronicler, unnerved, recorded the event and moved on, leaving the mystery unresolved. Centuries later, Mongol horsemen swept through the region. Their chronicles too mentioned strange towers shaped as hands, which no arrow could pierce, and which gleamed even in darkness. They left them untouched, though stories spread that Genghis Khan himself had been told of them. Supposedly, he laughed and said, "Even the sky has its guardians." What is most curious is that the bronze hands do not appear to have been cast by ordinary means. Archaeologists in the 20th century who examined fragments of the metal flakes broken free by centuries of wind and rare earthquakes found alloys unlike those produced by the furnaces of known ancient societies. The bronze itself seemed purer, harder, resistant to corrosion in ways that defied ordinary metallurgical processes. The patina was dark, almost black-green, yet it never fully crumbled as other bronze often does. In certain light, the hands reflected not brightness, but shadow, catching the sun in a way that made their surface glow dimly, like embers beneath ash. One theory suggests that they were remnants of a great monument, perhaps the fingers of a colossal statue whose body lies buried beneath the earth. But no foundation has ever been found, no fragments of arms, torsos, or heads. The hands exist alone, perfectly balanced, rising from the earth as though grown rather than built. Another theory imagines that they were astronomical markers, designed to frame a portion of the night sky at certain times of year. Standing between the 2 palms during the solstice, some researchers claim, aligns one's gaze with the rising of certain stars once sacred to ancient sky worshippers. But the locals, who have lived near them far longer than archaeologists or scholars, say that the hands are not monuments at all, but warnings. "Do not climb them," one elderly shepherd said when asked. "Do not sleep beneath them, they are not for us." Others whisper that the hands shift subtly over centuries, moving imperceptibly, tilting, stretching, always reaching further upward. A few insist they have heard sounds beneath the ground there, as if something vast stirs beneath the soil. Legends grew thick around the site. Some claimed that the hands were the remains of an ancient king who dared to demand immortality, only to be transformed into eternal bronze. Others said they were the hands of a forgotten deity, who once blessed the land with water, stretching upward as the rivers dried, locked forever in a plea the sky never answered. To walk to the site today, one would pass through sparse plains and narrow gullies, where the earth cracks with heat in summer and freezes solid in winter. The wind is constant, carrying dust in low veils. And then, abruptly, the hands rise before you, taller than the tallest trees of the steppe, wide as gates, their fingers impossibly detailed, every crease and fold sculpted as though from flesh. The surface, though weathered, gleams with a strange polish. At their base the soil is bare, as though plants refuse to root there. Birds circle, but never land. The silence around them feels heavier than elsewhere, as if sound itself is muffled. The strangest accounts describe nights when the hands appear to glow faintly, not with light, but with an aura, as though their outline quivers. Shepherds claim that flocks will not pass between them, no matter how desperate for grazing. Some whisper that travelers who dared to camp in their shadow dream the same dream, of standing beneath a sky without stars, of hearing a voice calling from above, though no words can be understood. There are stories of disappearance too. Centuries ago, a band of treasure seekers dug near the base of the Hands, hoping to find riches buried beneath. Their tools struck metal, but not coins or jewelry, something vast, unyielding, stretching deeper than they could reach. By dawn they were gone. Their camp remained, but no trace of the men was ever found. Villagers who later approached swore they heard faint ringing beneath the soil, as though bronze itself still echoed their touch. In the 19th century, Russian explorers recorded the site. Their maps mark it simply as the Hands. One journal describes a peculiar magnetism. Compasses spun wildly near the site. Iron nails in boots tingled as though pulled toward the bronze. Horses grew restless, refusing to approach. The explorers left quickly, leaving only sketches that survive in faded ink. Even in recent times, whispers persist. A geologist studying seismic activity in the region claimed to hear rhythmic vibrations beneath the ground, not natural, but steady, patterned, like a heartbeat. His report was dismissed by colleagues, but his notes reveal his unease. It is as though, he wrote, the earth remembers something it has no right to remember, and still the Hands remain, unmoving, untarnished, raised toward the sky. They have watched empires rise and fall, caravans cross and vanish, languages shift and fade. They have seen wars, treaties and silence. They stand as though waiting for something, an answer perhaps, or the return of a voice long lost. To stand before them is to feel very small, as though caught in a question larger than words. They are neither entirely human, nor entirely other. They are familiar and alien at once. They do not tell their story, but they hold it, clenched not in their palms but in the silence they stretch into the sky. And so, the bronze Hands of Uzbekistan remain, enigmatic, eternal, and unreachable. A monument without memory, a warning without words, a gesture that will outlast us all. The stairway that climbed into stone. Beneath the high skies of the Andes, where the clouds linger low and the wind moves across the mountains with the sound of an old song, there lies a place few travelers speak of, and fewer still can point to with certainty. It is not marked on most maps. Guides hesitate before mentioning it, as though its memory alone carries weight. The place is not a city, not a temple in the sense we know, but rather something stranger, quieter, a stairway carved directly into stone. Not one that climbs toward a palace or a shrine, not one that leads to a gate, or even to a summit. This stairway rises partway up the mountain, then stops. It is a stairway that climbs into stone itself, with no end, no arrival, and no explanation. The locals have a word for it, though it shifts in pronunciation between valleys and villages. Some call it La Escalera del Silencio, the stairway of silence. Others whisper of it as the steps of the ancients. In Quechua, the language that still threads itself through the land like the rivers that cut the valleys, there is a softer name, Rumi Yumpa, which roughly means the stone road that does not end. No matter the language, the meaning remains the same. It is a stairway carved with extraordinary precision, yet leading to nowhere. When you stand before it, the air feels different. The stairway itself rises from the earth, like a set of teeth, gnawed into the mountain's flesh. Each step is broad, smooth, and deliberate. The stone is weathered, yes, but not broken. Centuries of rain, wind, and sun have dulled its edges, yet the staircase retains its shape, refusing to crumble. It is as though the rock has chosen to resist time itself. From a distance it might appear small, no more than a fragment of an unfinished construction, but when one approaches, the sense of scale shifts. The steps are tall, each nearly as high as a grown man's knee. To climb them requires effort, lifting the body higher with every stride. There are 23 steps in total, though locals say once there were more. The stairway rises nearly 8 meters before halting abruptly. Its final step pressed directly into the mountain wall, as if the builders intended for it to continue further, but stopped suddenly, or perhaps vanished before the work was done. The mystery of who carved it is one that lingers in silence. Some attribute it to the Inca, whose mastery of stonework is legendary. Yet the Inca themselves, according to certain oral traditions, claimed the steps were already there long before their empire. There are whispers that it belonged to a people older still, a civilization whose name has been forgotten. Archaeologists who study the region have offered theories, each as incomplete as the stairway itself. Some suggest it was once part of a ceremonial site. Others argue it may have served as a symbolic ascent, not a practical one, a stairway meant for the gods rather than men. But even these explanations falter when one notices the precision of the carving. The stone is not crude, the steps are perfectly aligned, each one leveled with remarkable accuracy. This is not the work of chance or erosion, it is the work of intention, by hands or perhaps tools that knew exactly what they were doing. And yet it ends so abruptly, as though the mountain swallowed its continuation, or the builders abandoned it without reason. When the sun strikes it at dawn, the stairway glows faintly, its surface catching the light in bands of pale gold and silver. Shadows pool between the steps, giving the impression that they rise higher than they truly do. At midday, the stone warms and a heat shimmer dances upon its surface. But it is at twilight that the stairway feels most uncanny. The fading light stretches long shadows across the mountainside, and the steps seem less like stone and more like the outline of something unfinished, a sketch of a path that never found its destination. For centuries, stories have gathered around the stairway like moss clinging to rock. One tale says it was a ladder to the heavens, built so that the gods might descend to the earth. Another claims it was carved for giants, whose steps were too large for ordinary men. A more haunting belief, murmured among the elders of nearby villages, is that the stairway is not unfinished at all. Instead, they say it is complete, that it leads exactly where it is meant to lead, not to a visible summit, but to an invisible passage. Some say that those who climb to the final step and place their hand upon the stone may, if chosen, vanish into the mountain, never to return. These stories are not told casually. They are shared at night, near firelight, with voices lowered. Children are warned not to wander too close. And yet, in every generation, there are whispers of someone who could not resist the temptation. A shepherd who climbed the steps and never came down. A traveler whose footprints were found ascending, but none descending. The stairway takes no one openly. It offers no spectacle, no dramatic disappearance. But the silence around it holds weight, as though the mountain itself guards its secret. The modern world, too, has taken notice. Archaeological teams have measured, photographed, and documented the site. Yet their reports read less like conclusions and more like catalogs of unanswered questions. Ground-penetrating surveys have found no chambers behind the stone, no tunnels extend from its base. The mountain wall into which the stairway vanishes appears solid, impenetrable, and yet the air near the upper steps feels colder, as though the rock itself breathes. Some scientists propose the staircase may once have been larger, with the rest destroyed by earthquakes or landslides. The Andes are alive with tremors after all, and mountains shift over centuries. But this explanation does not satisfy all who visit, for the steps, even as they stand alone, seem complete in their incompleteness. They do not bear the ragged scars of collapse. Instead, they feel deliberate, as if the stairway was always meant to rise only partway, stopping short of its destination. One scholar once wrote that the steps may have served as an altar, that priests or shamans ascended them to perform rituals upon the final platform, offering smoke or song to the skies. Yet if this is true, no offerings have been found, no altars, no carvings of deities, no remnants of fire, only the stone patient and silent, as though waiting for something beyond human understanding. To climb the steps is to feel this silence. Each footfall echoes faintly, though there are no walls to reflect the sound. The higher one climbs, the quieter the world becomes. The wind seems to hush, the mountains around fade into stillness, and by the time the final step is reached, the silence feels so complete it presses against the ears. Those who have stood there say the mountain itself seems to listen. Some feel peace, others feel unease, as though being watched by unseen eyes. The stairway has no railing, no walls, no inscription. It is not adorned with symbols, not decorated with carvings, not shaped into images. Its simplicity is part of its strangeness. Most ancient monuments carry meaning through ornament, spirals, figures, patterns that tell a story. But here, there is only the pure geometry of the steps, as though the builders wanted nothing but the act of ascent itself to be the meaning. At night, when the stars wheel above the Andes in their vast constellations, the stairway takes on another character. Villagers say that certain stars seem to align with it at certain times of year. Orion, for instance, hangs low in the sky above the steps during the dry season. Others claim that the Milky Way seems to rest upon the staircase like a bridge of light. To those who believe, this is proof the stairway was meant as a cosmic map, a connection between earth and sky, and yet still, the question lingers, why stop where it does? Why not continue upward? Why not carve a summit, or an archway, or a doorway into the mountain? Was it abandonment, or was the ending always the point? When the Spanish arrived in Peru, they too were told of the stairway. Chroniclers wrote briefly of strange steps cut into living stone, but gave little detail. Perhaps it held no significance for them, lost amidst the greater riches of empire and conquest. Or perhaps they too sensed something unsettling in its presence, and chose not to linger. Today the stairway remains as it always has, patient, enduring, mysterious. Travelers who stumble upon it often leave with more questions than they arrived with. Some return home speaking of wonder, others avoid mentioning it at all, as though the memory itself is heavy to carry. The mountain does not give answers, the stairway does not explain itself. It rises into stone, and stops. And yet, in that stopping, it continues. In stories, in whispers, in silence. For perhaps the true purpose of the stairway is not where it leads, but the questions it leaves behind, and so it remains, beneath the sky of Peru. the stairway that climbed into stone and never came down. The serpent mask that wept with rain. There are places where the air itself seems older than the stones that rest beneath it. Places where the weight of centuries presses down so gently that one can almost miss it, mistaking it for nothing more than the heaviness of weather, the thickness of a cloud about to shed rain. Deep in the Colombian jungle, far from roads and villages, beyond the edges where maps once frayed into blankness, lies one of those places. It is said that here, hidden among vines and trees, there was once a mask of stone unlike any other. They called it the serpent mask, and it was not the name alone that earned it such weight. For when the rains came, and in this land they always came, in sheets, in curtains, in endless rhythms against the leaves, the mask was said to weep, not in metaphor, not as the mere suggestion of sorrow, but truly, as if the sky's water had chosen its carved eyes as channels, streaming down in paths that glistened like tears. The story of the mask is one that winds through fragments of memory, through shards of pottery unearthed where no villages remain, through carvings half swallowed by roots, through whispers carried along the Magdalena River and up into the highlands. No one is entirely certain when it was first made, or why. What lingers instead are impressions, repeated across time, that it was carved from stone darker than obsidian, that its shape was stretched and angular, as though the serpent whose features it bore was caught between two worlds, neither fully human nor fully animal. Some claim it was worn, though no one has ever agreed by whom. Others say it was never meant to rest on a face at all, but to remain set in the earth, its gaze fixed upward, catching each drop of water that fell from the sky. To reach the place where it was once said to rest, you must first imagine the silence of jungle nights. Not silence in the way one knows it in cities, but silence built from layers, the ceaseless hum of insects, the far-off call of nocturnal birds, the drip of water down leaves long after rain has stopped. The ground is thick with roots that curl like sleeping snakes, the soil soft with decay, so that each step presses into what feels like centuries of fallen things. Travel further, and the land begins to shift, rising into slopes where moss smothers stone, and vines braid themselves into walls that seem almost deliberate, though they are nothing more than nature weaving itself endlessly. It is there, in such a landscape, that travelers have spoken of glimpsing outlines where none should be. Steps cut into a hillside, though eroded nearly to nothing. Platforms that look too square, too straight to be chance. Fragments of pottery glimmering in riverbanks after storms wash soil away. Each of these fragments pulls the mind further toward a vanished people, one whose name has been largely erased, but whose echoes remain stitched into the land. Among their remnants always comes mention of the mask. Imagine approaching it in a clearing. The canopy above breaks slightly, and shafts of light fall in scattered pieces, each one caught in a haze of insects. In the center stands the mask, half buried, half upright, its stone face slick from the last rain. It is broad, stretching wider than a man's shoulders, its surface carved with the curling lines of scales that spiral outward into patterns, twisting and overlapping like rivers feeding into one another. The eyes are hollowed deep, almost tunnels, so that when water collects on its brow, it streams downward, spilling from them as though the mask itself were grieving. Its mouth is set not in anger, nor in joy, but in a curve so ambiguous that one could read it differently each time they looked. Local stories say that those who stood before it felt unease, not terror, not fear, but a weight in the chest, as though some emotion too large for words pressed quietly upon them. When the rains came, and here they come daily in their seasons, the mask changed. No longer static stone, it shimmered. Water coursed over its scales, pooling briefly in grooves before tumbling down. The tears from its hollow eyes ran steadily, sometimes for hours after the rain had ceased, fed by hidden channels within the stone itself. Some swore that the tears carried a sound, faint, low, like the distant hiss of a snake sliding across rock, or the murmur of voices too far away to be understood. Others claimed that if you pressed your ear close, you could hear a rhythm beneath it, a pulse as though the mask itself lived, its sorrow not performance but truth. Archaeologists, those few who dared to venture and document, wrote carefully, their language formal, yet between their words, wonder seeped through. One described the craftsmanship as beyond functional purpose, hinting that this was no mere ritual object. Another noted the alignment of the mask's face with the sky, how its eyes caught not just rain, but at certain seasons, the light of specific stars that pierced the canopy above. Perhaps, they suggested, the mask was not meant only to channel water, but to hold a dialogue between heavens and earth, a vessel of stone that bridged sky, serpent, and man. But the locals tell the story differently. To them, the mask was alive. It was said to have been made in the time when serpents walked upright, when rivers themselves chose their courses by listening to whispers in the soil. It was not carved, they say, but found, already waiting, shaped by something older than human hands. The first people merely uncovered it, brushing away earth and vine, until its face glistened in the sun. From then on, it watched, always. They say the rains were its gift, the mask's sorrow calling water down from the sky to feed the forest, the rivers, the crops. Without its tears, the land would have dried, and all life with it. Generations carried this story, though each shaped it slightly differently. Some told of a shaman who placed the mask upright, whispering incantations to open its eyes so the rains would flow. Others spoke of villagers bringing offerings, laying feathers and fruit at its base, so that the serpent spirit would remember them kindly when the clouds gathered. Still others, darker in their telling, spoke of punishment, that if the people failed to honor the mask, its tears would cease, the skies would harden, and drought would crack the land until nothing but dust remained. Even now, when the jungle has grown thick again, when the mask is hidden more often than seen, there are those who claim its sorrow still feeds the rains. They say that in seasons of unusual dryness, if one makes the long walk into the forest and stands before it, the skies will open, as though reminded. The mask, however, does not explain itself. It remains where it always has, stone against earth, carved face, gazing upward. Yet the questions it stirs are endless. Who shaped it, if it was shaped at all? Why the serpent among all creatures? Why tears rather than smiles or rage? Why must water course from its eyes? To think of it is to picture the cycles of this land. Rain swelling rivers, rivers feeding valleys, valleys sprouting crops, crops feeding lives. The serpent too belongs to cycles, shedding its skin, returning anew, coiled in eternal patterns. Perhaps the mask was never meant to be understood in one way. Perhaps it is not simply grief carved in stone, but the recognition that sorrow and life are bound together, that each drop shed is also a gift, that even tears feed what grows. And yet, there are other tales. Tales not of gratitude, but of fear. For water, while it nourishes, also destroys. The rains that bless crops also swell rivers into floods, tearing homes from their places, dragging soil away until only ruin remains. There are stories of nights when the mask's tears grew too heavy, when water poured not in trickles but in torrents, flooding the clearing, rising until it swept through villages downstream. On such nights, people whispered that the mask was not merely weeping, but grieving with fury, sorrow too vast to be contained. Those who tell these stories speak more quietly, as though afraid to give them too much shape. They say that once, long ago, an entire village vanished beneath waters that refused to recede. Only the mask remained, streaming endlessly, its stone eyes unblinking. No one dared approach it after that for many years. To stand before the serpent mask is to feel all these layers at once: awe, unease, gratitude, fear. It is not a simple object, it is presence itself, solid and yet shifting with each person's gaze. And the jungle, thick and alive around it, seems to guard its secret carefully, as though ensuring no one story ever wholly defines it. The rains will always fall here, the rivers will always swell, and somewhere, hidden in green shadow, the mask will always wait, its face lifted to the sky, its tears endless. The rains did not relent. They came with a steadiness that felt almost deliberate, as though the heavens themselves conspired to wash the jungle clean, to blur its edges, to soften the boundaries between one thing and another. In that constant curtain of water, the serpent mask seemed alive, trembling with a sheen that caught each droplet like liquid pearls. No matter how many times the villagers returned to it, no matter how closely they watched, the mask remained the same, stone, obsidian dark, its surface wet but never worn, and yet from the carved eyes, the water poured as if the mask itself mourned. In the legends, they said it had been placed there not by hands of men, but by a creature that crawled out of the earth in the first age of the world. It was not serpent, not spirit, not storm, but something in between, something that breathed where breath was not needed. The mask was its face, abandoned, left behind as a warning or a gift. No one agreed which. The elders whispered that the rains obeyed the mask, that the river rose and fell in answer to its sorrow. The crops thrived when the mask was visited, and offerings were made. They withered when the people ignored it. This was why, even in generations when memory frayed, the mask was never truly forgotten. Those who studied such things in later centuries called it illusion, a trick of porous stone and hidden channels. They said the mask was carved where water seeped naturally, that the constant weeping was nothing more than clever placement. They measured the flow, traced the rivulets, and wrote reports. But in their words something was always missing. They could not explain the way the water seemed to thicken when songs were sung to the mask, or how, on nights of thunder, the tears glowed faintly blue as though touched by lightning that never struck. They could not explain why no one had ever managed to move it, though countless hands tried, ropes strained, and pulleys snapped. The mask remained, unshaken, as if the jungle itself grew around it to hold it still. The villagers did not argue with scholars, they had no need. For them, the mask was not to be explained but lived with. In planting season, they left maize and cacao before it. At harvest, they poured chicha at its base. Children were told not to play near it, though some did, daring one another to touch its slick surface. Those who pressed their fingers to its mouth swore the stone pulsed once, faint as a heartbeat, before falling still again. Some of those children grew into men and women who carried a lifelong unease, a sense that the jungle was always watching them with wet eyes. When storms rolled from the mountains and floods threatened, the people said the mask cried harder. When drought struck, rare as it was, the mask dried too, its tears ceasing, its face cracking with dust. Always the mask mirrored the sky, and always the people returned to wonder what face it reflected when no one was near. Travelers came, they always did. The tale of a mask that wept had a way of spreading beyond the village paths, into the rivers that carried traders, and into the cities where tales turned to curiosities. Adventurers, priests, and collectors made their way through the jungle, each hoping to claim the mask, or at least its mystery. Some saw in it a relic of forgotten gods, some a proof of lost civilizations, some merely an artifact to display, yet none left with it. The mask stayed. But not all left whole. It was said that those who touched the mask with greed in their hearts found themselves lost soon after. They wandered the forest paths, unable to recall the way out, hearing only the steady sound of water dripping from unseen heights. One man returned days later, his hair turned gray, though he had been young when he entered. Another never returned at all, though his companions swore they heard his voice at night, calling from the undergrowth, his words garbled as if spoken through water. The villagers said the mask had judged them, and in its sorrow, had swallowed their reflections. The scholars recorded these tales too, though with the careful distance of disbelief. Yet still, in their journals, there was a hesitation, a phrasing softened, as though their pens knew better than to write with certainty. The rains deepened. The river swelled, carrying whole branches downstream. At night the mask's tears seemed endless, glistening like streams of mercury in the torchlight. A young woman named Yara, who lived closest to the clearing where the mask stood, dreamed of it often. In her dreams the mask was not alone. A figure of stone leaned over it, not quite human, not quite beast, with scales that shimmered like wet leaves. The figure whispered to her, though she never remembered the words. She woke with her skin damp, though her hut was dry. She told no one, not even her grandmother who had taught her the songs of the river. And then came the day when the tears ceased. It began as a silence so small it went unnoticed, swallowed by the sound of rain on leaves. But slowly the villagers felt it, the absence of dripping water, the stillness of stone no longer flowing. When they gathered before the mask, it stared back at them, dry. No droplets clung to its eyes, no rivulets traced its cheeks. The mask had closed itself, as though weary of weeping. Fear spread. The crops still stood green in the fields, but the elders shook their heads. When the mask no longer weeps, they said, the land will forget the rains. And indeed the days that followed turned strangely bright. Clouds drifted past but gave no water. The air grew heavy, the earth cracked, the river shrank. Each morning the villagers returned to the mask, and each morning they found it unchanged, its face unmoving, its sorrow sealed. Offerings were brought, maize, cacao, feathers, even blood from a cut across the palm. Nothing stirred it. The scholars, who had lingered in hopes of studying it longer, scribbled furiously. Some were excited. This was change, proof of their theories. Others were uneasy. Perhaps, one whispered, we should not have measured so closely. But still the mask remained still, and the people grew restless. It was Yara who broke the silence. She stood before the mask as the village gathered, her hair loose, her voice trembling with something between fear and certainty. It is not the offerings, she said. It is the songs. We have forgotten the songs. And with that she began to sing. Her voice was thin at first, a thread lost in the vastness of the clearing. But the melody was old, older than her grandmother, older than the stories. It was the river's song, the one carried in currents and remembered in stones. The villagers joined her, slowly at first, then with strength. Their voices wove together, rising and falling like water itself. And then, at last, the mask began to weep again. The first drop was slow, reluctant, sliding from the corner of its eye. Then another, then a steady stream, as though the mask itself sighed in relief. The water poured, clear and endless, soaking the earth at its base. The people fell silent, watching, and in that silence, the jungle seemed to breathe with them. The rains returned the next morning, soft at first, then steady, as if the sky too had remembered its song. But Yara knew it was not an ending. That night she dreamed again of the figure leaning over the mask, its whisper closer than before. This time she remembered the words. Do not forget again, it said. For sorrow is a river. If you dam it, it will flood. If you ignore it, it will dry. Only when you sing with it will it flow. She woke with tears on her own cheeks, though she did not know if they were hers or the mask's. The serpent mask still stands in the jungle of Colombia, its eyes forever wet with rain. Scholars continue to measure, villagers continue to sing, and travelers still come to see. But none leave with certainty, for in every reflection they glimpse upon its wet surface, one thing is always missing, their own face, as though the mask remembers them but refuses to let them remember themselves, and so the mask weeps, not for what has been lost, but for what cannot yet be known. The gate that opens only to shadows. There are places in the world where the earth seems to fold back upon itself, where stone rises not only as the memory of a temple, but as something closer to a secret. In the heart of Cambodia, deep within the encroaching jungles that stretch green and endless across valleys and rivers, lies a story passed down in whispers. The story of a gate that does not open to sunlight, nor to torchlight, nor to flame. It is said to open only to shadows. To find this place, you would have to begin not with a map, but with a silence. The roads into the Cambodian jungle are old, some paved with broken laterite stone that dates back to the Khmer Empire, others nothing more than footpaths that snake beneath the endless canopy. As you walk them, the forest presses close, the air heavy with the scent of damp leaves, orchids clinging to trunks, and the low drone of insects that seem to never pause. The deeper you go, the more the world becomes hushed, as if the birds themselves grow wary of some hidden threshold you are approaching. At last, there comes a point where the trees thin, and before you rises the ruin of a temple almost consumed by the jungle. Roots of strangler figs twist across walls once carved with stories, dancers with arched hands, warriors riding elephants, kings holding court. But one feature dominates all others. A gate of immense stone, higher than a house, framed by carved serpents whose scales ripple like frozen water. The gate has no hinges, no cracks, no obvious passage. It is a wall that should not be called a door at all. Yet the villagers who live miles away insist it is precisely that. They tell of their ancestors speaking of this place in fear, never approaching after dusk, for it was not during the brilliance of day that the gate was said to stir, but only when the jungle grew dark and the shadows deepened like a second kind of water. At those times the carvings seemed to shift. The serpents appeared to writhe, their eyes glinting as though struck by unseen fire. Some swore they heard a grinding, as though stone pressed against stone, and then, though no torch or flame could pierce the blackness, the gate opened into a passage filled not with light, but with shadow itself. Imagine standing there, the dusk gathering, the sounds of the jungle muted as though the trees themselves held their breath. Slowly the carvings soften, the air cools, and before your eyes, the wall that is not a door becomes something else entirely. The weight of centuries presses around you. You might feel a draft of air moving outward, chill, damp, carrying with it a scent not of earth and leaves, but something stranger, as though time itself were exhaling. Those who stepped through, the stories say, did not return the same. Some vanished altogether. Others stumbled back, pale and unblinking, unable to speak of what they had seen. A few whispered in fragments of stairways that went nowhere, of halls where statues turned their heads, of voices that sounded not from in front but from behind. Above all, they spoke of shadow, not as absence of light, but as something alive, something that reached out and lingered like a hand pressing against their own. Scholars have puzzled over such tales, searching the ruins for clues. The Khmer Empire, after all, left behind marvels of stone and design, Angkor Wat, Bayon with its endless faces, Ta Prohm swallowed by roots. This forgotten site, unnamed on most maps, seems to belong to the same era. The craftsmanship of its gate is undeniable, the serpents carved with precision, the lintel overhead filled with patterns of fire and water woven together. Yet unlike other temples, this place bears almost no inscriptions, no stories of gods or kings are etched in detail. Only the gate stands, as though it were the heart of the structure, the sole purpose of the ruin. Could it have been a ceremonial passage? A ritual threshold where priests enacted mysteries now lost to us? Or was it, as legend insists, something older still, something not built by human hands alone? The villagers who still whisper of it describe it differently. For them, the gate is not just a ruin, but a test. They say the shadows it opens to are not outside, but within, that whoever passes through is shown the echo of their own soul. For some, this reflection is too heavy to bear. For others, it becomes a kind of awakening, and for a rare few, it becomes a calling. Picture then the slow fall of twilight over the Cambodian jungle. The cicadas begin their high, insistent chorus. The air turns cool, heavy with the musk of wet bark and soil. In the failing light, the serpents on the gate seem to shiver, and a darkness deeper than the night itself pools along the seams of the stone. Slowly, impossibly, the gate breathes open, not with the creak of hinges, but with the sigh of stone dissolving into shadow. And there, beyond, lies not a corridor of stone lit by flickering flame, but a space where distance and time are no longer what you know them to be. Some describe walking into chambers where statues stood in rows, yet their faces were unfinished, blurred as if carved from mist. Others tell of staircases spiraling downward, the steps slick with condensation, yet leading not into the earth but into silence. A few swore they glimpsed figures moving beside them, not touching, not speaking, but always present, shadows that belonged to no body. And always, at the center, there was a voice. Not heard, but felt. Not in the air, but in the marrow. It whispered not words, but knowing. A sense of being weighed, measured, understood. Some fled, unable to bear the closeness of it. Others lingered, compelled as though by a dream they could not wake from. Whether any of this is real, no one can say. Archaeologists have catalogued the ruin, taken photographs, drawn maps of its fallen walls. Yet the gate itself, when visited by daylight, yields nothing more than silent stone, no crack, no hinge, no trace of motion. Only when the shadows fall, only when the forest grows still, does the possibility return. The jungle watches, the serpents wait, and the question lingers. What lies beyond a gate that opens not to light, but only to shadows? Perhaps it is nothing more than legend, a story whispered around fires to keep children close at night, or perhaps hidden deep within the jungles of Cambodia. There remains a threshold not meant for human feet, a passage that demands of its traveler not courage, nor strength, but the willingness to be seen in the darkness. And so the story endures. A gate of stone, untouched by centuries, yet alive with silence. A passage that does not yield to hands or to flame, but only to the presence of shadows. A reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved but only approached and left to watch us as we turn away. The gate remains, the shadows gather, and the jungle closes once more. Some mysteries stay buried, others wait in silence, and some still breathe in the shadows, waiting to be found. This has been Unearthed Secrets, where the past is never truly gone. If you enjoyed this journey, remember to like, subscribe, and share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Until the next secret is unearthed, good night.